Maybe you were monitoring their speech or something.
Right.
Excuse me, President Schwager.
Yes.
Mr. Donegan did text me around 6 that he was going to be a little bit late, so I'm not sure.
Yeah,
when
I
to-
also received a text. He did mention that he'd be a little late. So we'll give him another minute or two. We do have a quorum. We can get started in a minute or two.
How was vacation, Andy?
It was terrific. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, it was a great trip, had great weather. Seas were mostly good, mostly favorable, not every day, but mostly. Yeah, it was a good, nice getaway.
Good.
Thanks for asking.
Did the captain give you passing grades, Andy? I heard she was tough.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
The captain, actually the official captain was my daughter.
Right.
On the
that's
trip,
right.
who has the most experience sailing. So yeah, she kept the crew in line. Let's put it that way.
That's a big boat. It was 40 feet? 40 foot
Yeah,
boat?
44 footer. We rented it out of Newport and took a bunch of family members out. So it was good. A lot of fun.
Nice.
Haven't done that in a long time.
All right, we'll wait another minute or two and then we'll get underway. Okay, I think we're going to get underway. We're not quite at full strength, but we'll continue our meeting. The council previously came to order at 6 p.m. to interview members of boards and commissions for reappointment. So we are currently in session. We're going to resume now and start with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. So I'll ask our town clerk, Lee Carney, to lead us in the pledge.
Thank you. Please stand if you can. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Lee. I did want to introduce members of our Zoom panelists tonight. We have Councilor Karen Corenthal, Councilor Rainu Engelhardt, our town clerk Lee Carney, our town manager and first mate Andrew Nada, and our town solicitor Andrew M. Tights. Assisting us as hosts tonight are, it says Wendy Schmidl there, but I think it's Don Perret behind the scenes there, and Matt Weddle from our information technology department. I see Mr. Donegan has just come aboard. So welcome, Councilor Michael Donegan.
Thank you. We had a little internet outage in my neck of the woods.
Oh,
We have
pay your bills next time.
Thank you.
we have our stenographer, Carol Malaga, who will be here for the public hearing portion of our meeting tonight. And we will hopefully be joined by Councilor Michael Zarella in a little while. So last week, our community received the sad news of the passing of East Greenwich Police Sergeant Christopher Callan. Our first agenda item tonight is an opportunity to recognize and memorialize the life of Sergeant Callan. And although I don't know Sergeant Callan personally, East Greenwich is a small town and a close-knit place. And I've heard from many people about the impact his engaging personality and outstanding professional skills had on our East Greenwich community, on the state of Rhode Island, and in his service to our nation. Sergeant Callan ably served our community for 15 years on the East Greenwich Police Force. He was a member of the Rhode Island National Guard. He was a U.S. Army veteran and a member of the Army Special Forces, and he was awarded a Bronze Star during his combat tour in Afghanistan. In addition to his professional accomplishments, he was a warm and caring man with a lasting legacy to our community. And on behalf of the East Greenwich Town Government, I'd like to extend our sincere condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of Sergeant Callan. In a moment, I'm going to ask East Greenwich Chief of Police Steve Brown to offer some of his remembrances of Sergeant Callan. I did want to give my fellow councilors the opportunity, if they have any comments, to make them now, and then we'll introduce Chief Brown. Is there anyone else who'd like to make any remarks? Councilor Engelhardt?
Yes, I'd just like to extend my deepest sympathies to his family, to the department, and to the National Guard. I only know Sergeant Callan briefly through a couple incidents, obviously, with my children, and he was extremely nice, and he was extremely patient and very gracious. So I think it was a great loss to the community, I think to the department, and definitely to the National Guard. Thank you.
Councilor Corenthal? You just have to unmute, Karen.
Sorry. This past week, so many people have stopped me and said, expressed their sadness at the passing of the officer. And while I did not know him, I too want to just extend my deepest condolences to his children, Rosemary, Margaret, and Sam, to his ex-wife Sarah and his companion Stephanie, to his parents and his extended family, both including the police department and his fellow officers and his fellow family. It's very, very sad for the town. And maybe it's helpful to know how many people respected him and cared about him. Thank you.
Councilor Donegan.
Yes, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family, friends, and workers. you know, like other counselors, this has been a topic in our community as this tragedy has hit us, his family, at a time when, you know, it seems popular to talk about the police in a certain way with challenges. That's not what our community has done. The people who talked to me about it and about his passing have been very complimentary for those who knew him, and also complimentary of the organization and the people he works with. And so I'd like to extend my condolences and my deepest thank you.
Thank you for those remarks from the counselors. Mr. Nada, do we have Chief Brown on the line? Welcome, Chief.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Chief. We'd like to give you the opportunity to tell us a little bit about Sergeant Callan.
Sure. So I think for me, who Chris Callan was and the legacy he leaves behind can be summed up best by recognizing his selfless sense of service. Chris served his country in the military, his community as a police officer. He served his family, his friends, and his teammates in the military. Chris's passion was service to others. And the greatest trait he had was he did it all with a smile. He was a really fun-loving guy. He always had a smile on his face, and he always had that no worries attitude. And I think that was his greatest trait, because that drew most of the people that he met to him. He's a very friendly person and really a great attitude. I know he touched a lot of people, and you know, this past week we really learned that his extended family reaches around the globe. It's amazing how many people this guy knew. He will definitely be sorely missed by all of us.
Thank you, Chief. Chief, I think tomorrow morning there's going to be a procession through town. Are you able to tell us where that procession will go through?
Sure. So we will be leaving the police station at shortly after 8 o'clock, and we're going to wind our way back down to the beginning of Main Street at the north end, down towards the town hall. So we'll come in at the division end. The procession will move slowly down the entire length of Main Street. So if any of the residents or anybody wants to see and bid their farewell to Chris, Main Street, it will be the best location. Anywhere along Main Street will be the best location to say your final goodbyes.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you for your remarks.
Anytime.
I did want to have a moment of silence in reflection about Sergeant Callan's life. So I'd ask us to take a moment to remember him. Thank you very much, everyone. I'd like the record to reflect that Councilor Zarella has joined us, and we're going to move to the next section of our agenda, which is a public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the community to make comments on items related to town government that are not on the agenda. If you're interested in making a comment, please go to the participants tab on the bottom of the Zoom platform and raise your hand. Click the raise your hand under attendees. If you're on the phone, you dial *9 and that will raise your hand, and our host, Matt Wetzel or Don Perret, will bring you onto the Zoom platform. Is there anyone who would like to comment at this time? I'd ask that our hosts keep an eye out for any hands that get raised that I may miss, and alert me if I'm not seeing someone who wants to participate. Seeing no one raise their hand for public comment, we'll move on to the consent calendar. This is a portion of the agenda where routine items can be voted on as a group, unless one of the counselors would like to pull off a specific item for discussion. So tonight we have minutes from our June 8th meeting, minutes from July 13th meeting, a commendation for Anthony DeBella for serving on the Cove Commission, reappointment of Mark Shapiro to the Cove Management Commission, reappointment to Barry Golden to the Zoning Board of Review, reappointment of David Collier to the Zoning Board of Review, petition of the National Grid and Verizon New England for a joint or identical pole location on Eldridge Avenue. We have a request from the Greenwich Club for approval to supply alcoholic beverages on the premises daily between the hours of 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. And we have a resolution for the third renewed declaration of state of emergency through October 15th, 2020, unless renewed, modified, or terminated by a subsequent resolution. I'd like to pull off 6C, D, E, and F. I do like to recognize people who are being reappointed for boards and commissions. Are there any other items that people would like? Karen Corenthal?
Yeah, can you just go over 6G? Because sometimes we get emails regarding polls, telephone polls.
Sure, we'll pull that off as well. Any other items? So I'll look for a motion to approve items 6A, B, H, and I.
So moved.
Motion by Councilor Corenthal,
I'll second.
second by Councilor Engelhardt. I'll call the roll. Councilor Corenthal,
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt,
Aye.
Councilor Donegan, Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. I'd like a motion for a commendation for Anthony DeBella on the commission to give him a commendation.
So moved.
Moved by Councilor Donegan, seconded by Councilor Corenthal. So the commendation is from the East Greenwich Town Council, wishing to recognize Anthony DeBella for serving over 2 years on the Cove Commission. The council and the community want to thank him. Anthony also served on the planning board and has put a lot of time and effort into serving the town. He and his wife, Margie Ball, who also has volunteered on boards and commissions, are moving out of East Greenwich. And so they cannot serve on our boards and commissions now, but we thank them very much for their service to our town. So I'll take a roll call to approve the commendation. Councilor Corenthal,
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt,
Aye.
Councilor Donegan,
Aye.
Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. The next is a 6D, reappointment of Mark Shapiro to the Cove Management Commission for a 3-year term. Thank you very much, Mark, for continuing to serve the town. We appreciate your time and effort. I'll ask for a motion to reappoint Mark Shapiro to Cove Commission.
So moved.
Councilor
Second.
Corenthal, seconded by Councilor Donegan. Councilor Corenthal,
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt,
Aye.
Councilor Donegan.
Aye.
Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. I'd also ask for a reappointment of Barry Golden to the Zoning Board of Review as an alternate member. We just interviewed him last week, and he's also participated in the town for a number of years. So I'd ask for a motion to reappoint him.
So moved.
We have Councilor Corenthal, seconded by Councilor Donegan. Councilor Corenthal,
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt,
Aye.
Councilor Donegan.
Aye.
Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0 to reappoint Barry Golden. And next is a reappointment of David Collier to the Zoning Board of Review. We also just interviewed David. He was in his car when he was talking with us, but expressed his willingness to serve for an additional term on the zoning board. So I'd look for a motion to reappoint him.
So moved.
Corenthal, and seconded by Councilor Donegan. Councilor Corenthal,
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt,
Aye.
Councilor Donegan,
Aye.
and Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. So David Collier is reappointed. Item 6G, this is a petition for National Grid and Verizon New England to replace a pole on Eldridge Avenue. Mr. Nada, do you have any additional information on that?
Yeah, this is, and Joe is, of course, free to chime in if I stray at all in terms of my explanation. But this is, normally there's an individual pole application from a utility like National Grid or other provider like Verizon. But in this particular case, they're going to utilize the same pole. So it's along Eldridge Ave. So they would ultimately need authorization to be able to, whether it was a single or a joint pole installation. So pretty typical standard type of installation. Or was there something procedural, Karen, that you were interested in?
No, but sometimes we get emails regarding utility poles. So
Yeah.
just wanted you to explain it.
Yeah.
And if I read correctly, it's really for municipal services, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, you know, typically we get a lot of calls here when they're changing over poles and you end up with double poles for a period of time before they change out the wiring. And they typically stand side by side for much longer than people are comfortable with. So we will get the calls usually in that respect, but this seems to be a very standard joint pole installation.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so we will move to approve this petition to install utility pole on Eldridge Avenue. Do we have a motion for that? Councilor Corinthal, seconded by Councilor Donegan. Councilor Corinthal,
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt, Councilor Donegan,
Aye.
Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion to approve the petition carries 5-0. This brings us to item 7. This is reports and presentations. The first report we have is from our town manager, Mr. Nada, an update on projects around town, COVID-19 response, and public safety update. Mr. Nada.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Swager, members of the council. A lot of information here tonight, not all of which I'm going to cover in great depth, but I did want to run through for those members that are in the community who might be watching tonight, who maybe haven't gone in and looked at the backup materials, just to let them know kind of what's there should they want to dive in a little bit deeper. So initially, I traditionally provide a basic rundown of a number of topics on our pretty much almost on a weekly basis. We have updates from the League of Cities and Towns, and so they run through a series of health updates. Just recently, there was a significant update regarding municipal data and how that is being reflected on the Department of Health's website. So if you were to go on today, you'd actually find, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to it myself that quickly. No, I can. So they broke it down community by community, and I think if you scroll down and you find East Greenwich, what you'll find is with just over 13,000 population, we actually are in a very strong position in terms of the number of community members that have been tested. We're up over 2,500, or at 19%. And there's only a few communities in the entire state of Rhode Island that have a higher percentage of community members that have been tested. Beyond that, we've had 96 positive tests, and ultimately, that really represents only 4% of our population, which again is one of the lowest in the state. So I think there's some good numbers there to be able to track if you happen to be a statistician and you want to follow that information, not only broadly on a statewide basis, but also locally. In addition to that, the league did a nice job of running through some summary updates from a series of conference calls that are starting to be reduced in number, but they still occur on several times a week, almost daily, based on the various agencies that are involved on a statewide basis. And they cover updates on testing, vaccines, updates on the reopening, many, as you can imagine, reopening questions regarding all of our economy and really all of the facets of our lives, really, in terms of not school reopening, campaigning for candidates on a door-to-door basis, various types of recreational elements that are still slowly reopening, such as playgrounds, PPE distribution that's still occurring to a number of our public safety agencies, as well as communities. There were a couple of meetings that are going to come up as well, and although I think we probably feel we're all veterans at this point in terms of our Zoom guidance in public meetings as we've been holding them. You know, I think there are many out there that are still learning and there is a learning curve and a comfort level that you need to have in terms of how you manage the meetings also. So there's a large scale group of state agencies that are putting on a session on September 15th at 9:30. There'll be additional details to follow just about how you hold a public meeting. And I think a lot of this will be focused on how you manage attendees, where some communities were still having everyone who signed up actually having a video link and being reflected over multiple pages. Anybody, there could be hundreds of people, where others are managing it in a similar way to as we're managing it in terms of being a panelist and then being controlled in terms of when you can speak as a member of the public. Beyond that, our FMLA leave guidance federally, the serology antibody testing that's going to be unveiled in terms of for our first responders, other reopenings in terms of flea markets, playgrounds, and other important things that are happening statewide in Rhode Island due to the summer season where we find ourselves. State beaches, I think we all saw recently over the past few weeks, there was significant concern regarding lack of compliance. And I think it's something to remember, clearly where we all see it enough each night when we go home or in the morning when you turn the news on. You know, there are other parts of the country that are continuing to struggle. So we truly, although many of us have kind of begun to move beyond it, I think it's far too early for any of us to truly do that. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that others are suffering around the country because really of their lack of due diligence in certain cases. So I think the state having reduced capacity at various beaches and tried to limit exposure is something that we're probably going to see more of as we continue through the summer. Number 8 on my initial list includes some state budget and local education aid comments. So, you know, and it may just be me, but I still am a little hesitant regarding kind of the next phase. And I think what we're seeing from the governor's office and our legislature, I think everyone remains extraordinarily hopeful that our federal delegation is going to create some positive momentum associated with a fourth stimulus package that's going to backfill some gaps and voids that each city and town in this state and every other state is having at this point in time. And although we've all started to see the economy come back, everyone has been somewhat quiet while we wait to see what's happening with this fourth stimulus. So for me, a lot of it focuses on education. And I'm still concerned, and there was some information that the league put out. I'll just read it briefly that, you know, there's an initial payment of education aid that comes out by July 31st, and the state is continuing to follow their legislative deadlines that they have for those payments. So because the state doesn't yet have an FY21 budget, what they've opted to do is have a particular percentage of 91.7% of the FY21 projected levels that are really going to reflect the FY20 appropriated amount. So you need to actually go into the state information that's actually on the municipal finance website, and you'll see what they mean by FY20 appropriated amounts, and then also the FY21 projected levels that have yet to be approved in any type of budget. So what concerns me about that is, and I've mentioned this before and I'll continue to mention it, is just based on the decisions that get made associated with how much money the state of Rhode Island does have, the final decision that's made, if we're going to follow the FY21 state education aid criteria, or we're going to fall back on a trend over a multi-year period, or we're going to fall back and say we're going to utilize the same FY20 numbers. I would say to the average citizen that's out there, if I were to say, look, East Greenwich is going to get their same FY20 numbers, we're not losing any revenue, they probably would say, that's terrific. And that's a positive thing. That's the narrative that I think would be sent. I think on this call, we understand that that means we're going to lose about $758,000 because our FY20 numbers, we were finally seeing a shift in the formula based on the criteria that all cities and towns have to adhere to, where the money follows the child and the student, and then a number of other criteria based on demographics and social issues and impacts that each community has. And that is a massaged formula over a multi-year period, where if you don't follow the FY20 number in a transparent and equitable way, East Greenwich, who we speak for, could sustain a significant loss. So that's a message. I've got the opportunity to communicate with the governor at a meeting with a couple of key members of the league on this Friday. And so that's a message that I'm going to be looking for some support from the governor's office and her staff and the legislature in that respect, because I think that's one area that, and in a moment, I'm going to talk a little bit about the superintendent's draft reopening plan. And I think if you happen to scroll through that plan, you'll see some of the estimated costs associated with implementing that plan, which makes the state aid even that much more important, not only to East Greenwich, but to every other community. So those are the only comments. What I also did below is I added some information from a number of studies that have been conducted over the past 10 years on the education aid formula. All of them, whether it was conducted by independent, objective panels, whether it was the Rhode Island Foundation or whether it was through RIDE, they all basically wanted to develop an equitable formula that was transparent and consistent, could not be manipulated, and that would be kind of steadfast through any of these periods. So the last thing that I know I'm looking for, and members in the community are looking for, is for anyone to reach in and start to tinker with that formula, because what that'll do is that'll skew the equity part of it, and then there will be clear winners and losers, which is not something I think anybody wants to happen. So those were some of the additional comments. We've yet to hear regarding, and I think we will fairly soon, as I think the legislature and governor are starting to run out of time. We're going to hear soon on our motor vehicle phase out, excise tax phase out, and those dollar amounts, as well as a pilot, which doesn't affect every community, but clearly will have an effect here in East Greenwich based on the significant pilot funding that we receive from the presence of New England Tech. In addition to that, there's just some basic information on some of the programming that was released on the small business assistance that's happening statewide, really a national initiative, and the governor's already come right out and committed funds to economic development and small businesses in the state, with some significant pressure that was put on by the lieutenant governor in terms of that communication with small businesses that occurred statewide. There's some additional information on FEMA guidance regarding the 25% reimbursement. Another message that conversation that we want to have with the governor is that there are states across the country that have made their initial allotment of the CARES Act, and in Rhode Island, as we know, it's $1.25 billion. They've made that 25% reimbursement from the cities and towns eligible for reimbursement from that $1.25 billion. So right now, we're starting to get close to about 100,000. We're about 85,000, but we're closing in on 100,000, and I clearly will be well beyond 100,000 by the time this is finished in terms of the overall expense, which means we'll be on the hook for 25% of that. In addition to that, the National League of Cities is starting to roll out some fairly targeted positions on the fourth stimulus. And so I think what you find is that all of the states in the country, not all of which are a member of the National League of Cities, is starting to align their perspectives and starting to pool their resources to be able to send a clear message that the only way a recovery, in our estimation, is going to be successful is that if it really starts at the grassroots and cities and towns across the country get the relief, or some portion of the relief that we really need to get us through this period. In addition to that, on August 8th, I'll be joining a call. The reason why I note these meetings is for the council and the community. Should anyone have a strong position or have a question that they'd like to have presented, and I happen to have that opportunity to do that, I'd be happy to do that either with the governor or with the Commissioner of Education. That meeting's going to be on August 8th. There'll be a number of other members of the League of Cities and Towns that get to participate on that call. In addition to that, I included a copy, which I'm sure you already have or may have actually had the chance to tune into the superintendent.
Andy, can I interrupt you 1 second, Andy?
Yeah.
Councilor Cornthal had her hand up for a minute.
Oh, sure thing. Absolutely. Yep.
Karen, you're muted.
Hi. When you talk to the education commissioner, it is just ridiculous that they're even thinking about not giving the schools a ton of money. For example, I've been doing a little bit of checking just to provide the PPEs.
Mhm.
It's between $400,000 and $700,000. I mean, it's ridiculous, just ridiculous. We can't expect our taxpayers in our town to cover all these costs. It is ridiculous. So you ask them how they're going to plan to do that. And in addition, the janitors that they're going to need and the cleaning products. It's absurd. It's absurd. They need a lot of money.
Mark?
You're muted, Mark.
Councilor Donegan, go ahead, please.
Andy, I just wanted to, as we talked about before, we get such little aid that if we're cut, whatever we face is going to be dramatically impact, the other communities. But what I wanted to know is if you'd had a chance to, I know that you've talked to our senator and rep, and I was just wondering if you had any update, like when you're talking about whether or not we're going to get the benefit of using this year's numbers as opposed to, some prior year's numbers, whether you had any kind of conversation with them recently. I know we talked another time about this, but at some point, can you just keep them in the loop and keep us in the loop and let us know how it's going?
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, Mike, there's been no new information, and I think the conversations are happening fast and furious, and I think everyone is trying to hold off, I think, as long as they can until there's some type of settlement on this fourth stimulus. And I think we all know there's going to be a fourth stimulus. It just depends on how much of that funds are directed. And then once they get to Rhode Island, I think that's when not only our federal delegation, but our legislators really need to hear, and I'm sure they will hear from every community on how those dollars are going to be allocated. Because to Karen's point, there's really, there's no way that the school, I think if you looked at the superintendent's report, you're up around $2.5 million in additional staffing and equipment and other costs that would be involved for them to follow all the CDC and the ride regulations as they exist today. So clearly that's not going to be possible. So the likelihood is for education to open, and if that's the president and the governor's wishes that there be some semblance of public education that opens, they're going to have to heavily fund that, because there's really there's no chance of local municipalities across this state or any other state funding it. So no, absolutely, Mike. I'll be any information that I receive, and I think the next 2 weeks we'll have some critical meetings with some key officials. So hopefully we'll have some good information that comes from.
I guess Andy, thanks for that. My question was a little narrower than that. Yep. It was, given that we are going to have a different calculation to the state aid, and the idea that applying last year's number to us works a significant injustice to us. Yes. That's something that I think you're going to carry into your meeting, but also yes. Representative Caldwell and Senator Valverde can also make those cases. And, yes. I think they've indicated that they're already trying to do that. Mm-hmm. And so just if we could keep them in the loop and let us know how that's going, that would be very helpful, because it's not always true that when they're making these broad decisions, they would think of that consequence. I don't think that would be in front of them.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, happy to do that. And I think beyond that, I just really wrapped up with C being just a statement that was recently released from the ICMA, the International City County Management Association, international organization that the majority of town managers, administrators are members of across the country and in various countries around the world, dealing with systemic racism and inequities that exist in all of our communities to varying degrees. And so I just included that for the council and for the community's review. It's something you won't just trip across if you're online. You've got to actually reach out and find it. In addition to that, I provided kind of an updated list on various initiatives that various entities in the community and individuals are continuing to work on, that will be circling back at the appropriate time to provide updates to the council. And that could be something as simple as a recent meeting that Bob Hoderling and I had, where we were communicating with the superintendent, is that there are initiatives underway already for curriculum adjustments within the public schools to modify some of their curriculum to address some of the inequities that are now kind of front and center. In addition to that, the Rhode Island Police Chiefs Association and their 20 promises in 2020 is something that our law enforcement officials have embraced and are working very closely with them on, which will address many of the concerns that were initially raised and are continuing to be raised regarding law enforcement interaction with members in the community, and how that's done. In addition to that, dealing with social and emotional health and impacts for young and older members in our community. So there's a number of things that are ongoing right now, and I look forward to be able to circling back with the council with various professionals, and some of them being just students. Some of them are high school students who are working right now in a youth diversity committee and looking at ways to positively impact the high school and education and their friends and their faculty members at the high school, as well as other schools in the community, and how they communicate sometimes very tough messages, but how they can also be patient enough to learn from each other. So there's a lot of those types of conversations that are happening in town. I don't think we're quite ready to bring any of those results back to the council, and they're kind of evolving as the community wants them to evolve, as we had originally talked about. It's not something that the town, through the efforts of Bob and in his interaction, or through our school district, or through others in the community, or through law enforcement officials, are going to force on the community. It's something that's either going to be embraced and be adjusted and moderated to meet the community's expectations, or it's not. So as we go forward, I look forward to bringing some updates back to the council on those particular topics. So, the one thing I did want to mention before I kind of hold off is just on the, I was very impressed with the work of the superintendent and the various working groups that were put together to develop the initial draft. And I think the superintendent made it very clear that that's really what the initial fall reopening plan is. And it's just a draft because things continue to change so dramatically. But there's, I highly recommend that community members, not only those involved with public education in town, but others in the community, just take a minute. I think it's in a summary at this point, 25 pages, but it is a summary kind of the various targets and the guiding principles and the vision and the targeted areas of, health and safety, as well as instruction, as well as social, emotional, mental health, as well as just reopening operations, which is some of what Karen referred to earlier, and that would involve also transportation challenges that are gonna exist, out of district transportation, significant changes and leaning towards reliance on not only professional staff, paid staff, volunteers, and others to help make up some of the difference that I think we're going to need to make up to be able to put together a viable program. So these are all things that the school working groups through the school committee and superintendent and the professional staff have been working on, and we support them in that. I just think it's still only less than 4 weeks away. It's still a little bit early because they don't have really a clear direction from RIDE in terms of the funding and some of the do's and don'ts that are going to be allowed as they move forward. So I'm confident in the coming weeks we'll be hearing much more from the school department in that respect. That's really the final piece that I have, Dr. Swager.
Council Cornthal, do you have a question?
No, I have a sort of a statement. Andy, I really appreciate your the ICMA executive board statement. I read it. I thought it was excellent. I think that's certainly a great start. And I also commend what the police are doing, and that 20 promises. I looked at that too, and I think that is really certainly a wonderful start. As far as the schools go, on Tuesday they had an information session, and I'm sure a couple of us were in on that. There were over close to 500 people participating in that. This is a lose, lose, lose all the way around, because, there's always going to be somebody not happy. But I too know how hard the school is working, and various individuals and Mrs. Meyer and her staff. And I too commend them, because RIDE sort of gave every town, come up with a plan approach. I don't know that I agree with that, frankly. But they're really doing an outstanding job, and so I commend them as well. Thanks.
Other questions for the manager? And I just one question. As one of your items was I'm just trying to find it back here. Under administrative updates, having to do with community efforts to minimize spread of coronavirus. Have you had any problems that have come to your attention as far as businesses or residents complying with standard recommendations for public health?
Sure, we definitely have. I think they've been few and far between, so I think that's promising, Mark and fellow members of the council. I think it's, we've had a few restaurants that we've had one that was cited for some violations in terms of compliance with state mandates. In addition to that, we have had some reports of lack of appropriate spacing at various recreational sites around town. Kathy Bradley, in managing the high school athletic complex, has reached out and is doing some investigating of organized teams that are not scheduled to use a field, that are just showing up and using a field. So we have had some reports from concerned residents in that respect. But I would say, all in all, if that is the extent of it, that's actually pretty good. I've recently, in my travels and even in the state of Rhode Island, I have been in some communities that I think are far more challenged in this area than we are at this particular point. But I think your point, Mark, is that even younger people, coaches, leagues, Little League, lacrosse, soccer, all these organizations need to be very, very cognizant that it's not worth the risk to be able to have 10, 20, 30 kids together with multiple coaches and adults and parents. And I think everyone's trying to slip back into that normal mode, which they're used to and they're comfortable in. And clearly, nationally, we're just not there yet. So we would strongly recommend that everyone continue to wear masks in the company. And I know it's difficult, especially with heat that we're having right now, difficult at times. I think you need to be very cognizant of your own limitations in terms of breathing and other medical conditions that you may have. And there are, unfortunately, some young and older members in the community that may need to just hold on. It may not yet be time for them to actively participate as much as they'd like to. And I think the same goes to our slow introduction and reopening of our senior center. You know, we are really taking baby steps as we slowly start to reopen. We need to have that facility open, especially during periods of heat like we have right now, just as a cooling center. But there's significant spacing that Charlotte Markey is managing with her staff there in terms of just slowly reintroducing those that truly need support in a public facility, or need us to continue to deliver things to them. So that's happening at a much lesser rate than it was many weeks ago, but it still exists. So I would say, all in all, we're not in bad shape, Mark, but we have run into a few problems here and there.
And if someone in the community has concerns about public health or public safety, who should they contact?
Yeah, so they've got some options. I think the best bet would be to contact Town Hall. I would contact my office here or the clerk's office. That information will get to me and we can distribute it to the appropriate department. If not, many of the calls typically end up being filtered through either our police or fire departments. Those seem to be the two departments that people in town are most comfortable making an initial call. And so we many times are getting that information referenced back here, and then we disseminate it to people like Kathy Bradley, who it might be a recreational issue. Yeah, but town hall would be the place to start.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. There's a lot of information there, and if people are interested in getting more in the weeds with a lot of the information there. It is available on our website under the town manager's report. The next report tonight is item 7B, report from the town manager and finance director on results of the town's capital equipment bond sale on June 13th. So on June 13th, the town sold $3,485,000 worth of town and school capital equipment bonds. The bonds were sold as a bank direct purchase, and the town received 6 bids from local, regional, and national banks. The winning bid was JP Morgan with a rate of 1.12% for the 7-year bonds. So I'd ask the manager to comment on this and describe a little bit more detail about the sale of these bonds for capital equipment.
Sure. You know what, Mark? I'm going to ask Trish Sunderland just to run through it. Trish handled this herself, and I think the results speak for themselves. Those are fantastic results for us. And let me just have Trish run through her experience with the market and provide some perspective on what she thinks about the results that we generated.
Hi, Trish.
Hi, Trish. I think you're muted.
Am I on now?
You're good.
You are. You have a little bit of an echo. You come on our screen on 2 different sites here. It looks like you've muted the one of the phones. So why don't you go ahead, Trish? Welcome to our meeting. This is Trish Sunderland, our Director of Finance. Trish, are you still on?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Now you're coming through. Thank you.
Okay. I apologize. In conjunction with the financial advisors and bond counsel, we conducted the bond sale on July 13th. We'll be closing on the bonds on July 30th. We did receive 6 bids on a 7-year bond. The winning bidder was JP Morgan at 1.12%. The bonds that we sold, as you know, is the $2.7 million town capital and equipment bond, as well as $785,000 of the school bonds. The $785,000 is the $5 million bond that was approved by the voters in November. We combined this with the town sale because the equipment bonds are not reimbursable by RIDE. So we thought we would consolidate them to get more interest in our bonds, which, as you can see, we had quite a bit of interest. The rates were very aggressive. Despite the market volatility due to COVID, we're still finding that the rates that they're proposing are at a historical lows. Which is real good news for us. So this is a 7-year bond, and as I said, we issued them as a bank qualified, and under the IRS ruling, we can do that provided we're selling less than $10 million in the calendar year. And they're typically 5 to 20 basis points lower than the competitive bids that we would typically issue in the open market. So I don't know if there's any questions, but good results. And moving forward, we're going to be doing a refunding. So it's a good time right now to issue.
Certainly excellent rate. So Trish, the banks get a tax break with these bonds. Is that why they're very attractive to banks?
That's exactly right, yes.
And what is the benefit to the bank when they issue these?
Well, they get to deduct 80% of the interest expense.
Very good. So this has already occurred, is that right? There's no vote that is required at this time.
That's correct. This is informational purposes. There's no rating required. We don't have to prepare an official statement with the bank qualified, so there's nothing really to do. We had our approval when you approve the ordinance, so we're just going to move to sign the bond, and hopefully you're available tomorrow, Council President Schwager.
Yes, I'll come by in the morning and we'll sign off on this and get it going.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for the update. Are there any questions, Councilor Donegan?
Trish, you mentioned refunding opportunities. Are those for the other bonds already issued out in the market? Is that what you're referring to?
They are, and that's on our, that's coming up on new business.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for our Finance Director? If not, thank you again, Trish. And don't go away because you're on again under new business. So now we're going to move to item 8, which is the public hearing portion of our agenda. The first item for public hearing is application of a new amplified sound permit for 5702 Post Road Corporation doing business as the Waysider Grill. So the Waysider needs to come to the council now for permission to get an outdoor sound license as part of to add on to their entertainment license. So sound permits for businesses with entertainment licenses require a public hearing under our new noise ordinance from November of 2019.
So they don't have one right now?
They do not. They are coming to us requesting a outdoor amplified sound permit.
Because they have been playing music a lot this summer.
I'll ask our town clerk, Lee Carney, do you have any anything to add to this application or comment on Mr. Zarella's concern?
Yes, I do. I know we do know that the restaurant received a complaint and was visited by I believe the police department, which triggered this process. So I think it was maybe just a little bit of confusion on Linda's part. I think she thought she had one with the original entertainment license that she needed. So I don't think she was quite sure that she needed one for outside. So we got it on the agenda as soon as we could, and I don't think there was any more complaints after the initial complaint, so she complied until this gets passed. So everything is in order with this application. The fee's been paid and our taxes are current.
So Lee, in the past, these applications went to the police department, is that correct? And now they're coming to the council?
That's correct. Only for those that have an entertainment license.
Okay. And the other ones will continue to go to the police department?
Correct.
Can I ask a question? I was curious. I mean, are there other restaurants like Waysider, which I'm assuming this is a temporary situation due to the COVID, that they're seating outside. Are there any other restaurants who are also having outdoor entertainment that may not be? Do we know of any other ones, or is this the first one?
I haven't heard of any others, no.
Okay.
And is this related to the COVID seating outdoors?
Yes. Linda's seating folks outside and trying to supply a little bit of, ambiance to parking lot dining. So I think that's what kind of triggered this. Yes.
It's usually just one person with either.
Yeah, it's not.
It hasn't been anything major.
No.
So how quick can we do this tonight? Get her a temporary license or a license tonight, or does it have to be ready?
Yeah, it's all set. If you approve it, it should be good to go for tomorrow.
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Mike,
And
Hold on. Sorry, Sandy Tights. We just got to call and see if there's anyone from the public who would like to speak.
yeah, I'm
on this.
gonna let the motion be put on the table, and then we'll go to public comment. So we have a motion from Mr. Zarella, seconded by Mr. Donegan. And then I'll just open it for discussion on the council, then we'll turn it over to the public, and then we can take a vote. Mr. Donegan.
So for discussion purposes, I just wanted to make sure that the question that was asked earlier, that I understood the answer. So when outside seating is granted during the COVID licensing process, would this noise the ability to have amplified noise outside, would that expire with the special outside COVID seating, or would that remain even after the seats have to go in?
I can take that. This is Andy Tights, town solicitor. You can't have the entertainment if there's no seats outside. This is, however, being done in the process of a regular entertainment license. So this would be good through, this amplification would be good through the end of November, this license year. But if there were no seats, they couldn't just have someone there and have entertainment without service. But we did not include outdoor amplified entertainment or any actual entertainment in the special ordinances we passed to allow people to move food and beverage service outdoors into their parking lots and whatnot. We did not include entertainment as a quick fix. They have to go through this with a advertised public hearing.
Okay, and I guess Andy,
If
since
they're
we
doing
really
amplification.
and Andy, since we've really told everyone that whatever they get, that's a modification, it's good through the late fall anyway, right? Through November, so that they know they can invest in real tables and chairs and all of that.
Yes,
They're
exactly.
coextensive anyway by that reasoning, is that right?
That's correct. These are all
Okay.
good through the end of November. That's the end of the license year. So that they, even if, I mean, it would be nice if the governor's state of emergency expired before November and everything were coming back to normal. But if that does happen, we're still telling people, okay, you've got this until November.
Yep. Thank you.
Mark, you got a hand up.
I'm sorry, who's raised their hand?
You have,
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's when we come to the public comment, we'll recognize. It looks like Linda Fraunfelter. Well, the
That's
hand,
the applicant.
I see. Okay, Linda, we'll bring you on. Can we unmute Linda and bring her onto the call? Hi, Linda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Good evening.
Great. Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, we're in the midst of discussing the applications. Is there anything you'd like to add to the discussion?
I just wanted, yes, I have been providing entertainment outside. I have not been compliant. I thought I was compliant. So as soon as I found out I wasn't, I contacted Lee and now here I am. It is acoustical music. I mean, I'm just trying to do my best. It's pretty much all I can say.
I didn't mean anything by it. I was just wondering if you thought you already had a license, because I heard the.
Yeah, I didn't realize. Well, I thought that it would. I thought that I didn't need anything. As soon as I found out, I made the appropriate steps to get myself here. So.
Yeah, well, glad you came before us today. I don't see it's going to be a problem, but and again, I never know.
Are there other questions or comments for either the applicant or for our clerk or solicitor? Okay, at this point, this is a public hearing, so we'll ask for input from the public if they have any comments on this application. If you're on the Zoom panel, click the participant button, then go to attendees, and you should see a raise your hand button on the bottom. If you're on the phone, you can dial *9, and then that will raise your hand, and we can bring you into the meeting. So I don't see any attendees who have their hands raised, and if our hosts can just double check me. If there are no additional comments or questions from the council, then we do have a motion and a second, so we'll take a roll call. Councilor Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella?
Aye.
Councilor Corinthal? Councilor Engelhardt? Chair votes aye, motion carries 5-0. So Linda, you are now legal and clear.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very
Best
much.
of luck, Linda.
Thank you.
Good, so we will now move to our second public hearing, and this is a presentation of the proposed sewer budget for fiscal year 2021 in the amount of $4,077,079 with a sewer rate of $12.92 per 100 cubic feet. And for a presentation and discussion, we have our Director of Public Works, Joe Duarte. And I see Joe's name on the attendees list, so if we can bring Joe on to lead us through the public hearing on the sewer budget.
Good evening, councilors. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Joe.
How you doing? All right, I think the easiest thing to do, I'll try to make this brief, the presentation, but if you could turn to the page that has the expenditure summary.
Joe, are you able to share your screen?
Let's see, switch to computer audio, unmute, stay muted. I cannot. Oh, hold on.
I don't know if yeah, I don't see for our hosts. Are our hosts able to go to the agenda and share that section of the agenda?
I'll be up there in a couple minutes for you, Dr. Swing.
So which piece do you need do you need shared? The overall
So
budget?
when you get it, yes, when you get to the budget sheets, the first section is the revenue sheets.
Summary
I would
of
say,
revenue.
yeah, it's actually, if you keep going to the expenditure sheets, which is either page 5 or 6, it's a summary of expenditures.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I see
Everybody
it.
there?
Why don't you go, Joe, and then once our hosts can try to get that up for us, we'll put it on the screen.
Right. So it's usually the best presentation tool for the sewer budget. And if you look at the two top sections that are labeled salaries, we'll start there. What we did this year, in the past, we had a transfer of $43,000 that was made at the end of the year for services provided by town personnel outside of the sewer department. And that was just made as a transfer, a lump sum. What Ms. Sunderland wanted to do this year is to, instead of just doing the transfer, do an automatic expenditure right away of a couple salaries in the finance department. And that's reflected in the salary section as well as the next section that's also labeled salaries. And that's the benefits screen. All right, if we could keep going down, Matt. Keep going. Oh, we got a ways to go.
Maybe he could just hit the link.
I can't control that, Matt. I don't think I can hit this any one of the links, or I can scroll down.
Matt would have to do that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Remember what the page was again?
It's on page 67. Page 67 of the agenda.
Yeah, right there. So basically, the top two sections that are labeled salaries as categories, as I was trying to explain, that right now there's going to be two salaries from the finance department that are being reflected here as direct charges to the funds. That's why the first line item, salaries, is not reflecting the 2% increase that we have contractually in our labor agreements, but also it reflects a portion of two of the finance department employees. And then the longevity line item went down some because we had an employee that retired this year. And so that reflects that reduction. The next items, you'll see all the benefit sections, like state retirement and so forth. Myself or Ms. Sunderland, maybe if you have any questions on those. Again, it's reflective of different contractual agreements as well as, and now reflects the two salaries direct charge to these line items. So they're being reflected there. The next sections, I won't go over every line item unless one of the councilmen wants me to. I will just go over the significant changed line items. So the first one that you're going to see is lab and safety. Does everybody see that?
Mhm. Yes.
There's two line items that are affected. It's the lab and site safety, and then two line items after that, professional services. Those two line items have gone up substantially because of we have to increase our pretreatment program. And what that is every business industry in particular that discharges to our treatment plant is required to have us monitor their chemical constituency that enters the town sewer system. Restaurants also are concerned because of the grease and oils they could discharge. So at the end of 2018, early 2019, Rhode Island DEM came to the plant to examine our program, and they felt we needed to make a few changes. So we're going to do that. And the two line items that reflect that is the lab and safety. So there's going to be extra testing that we're going to be required to do. And we're also seeking outside consulting services to help us with this program, at least to get it started and continue. One other item that added to this line item is the breweries. Presently, we have one brewery in town with the possibility of a second. And we did have until recently a distillery that was also interested in coming to the town. The concern with those types of businesses is one of the chemical constituency called BOD, or biological oxygen demand. It's really a measure of the amount of nutrients that come in that wastewater, and alcohol in particular can be very, very high in BOD, substantially high, and we're concerned. I know DEM has just put out a paper last year about the concerns with breweries. And so we are seeking professional advice on how to make sure that they can come into compliance. We have a local, and part of the pre-treatment program is we have to do a new report submitted to DEM, which is called a local limits analysis. And what that is, I mean, our industry right now, we still have some, but it's basically zero discharge of processed waters. It's basically just their domestic waste, bathrooms and the like. Processed water, we really don't have any facilities outside of the breweries that's discharging. And so we look at a variety of chemicals that they discharge to our plant. And so we devised this report, local limits, which I will introduce to council once DEM approves. And basically what that is we impose these limits on the type of discharges that these industries can allow to discharge. When we had on semi, they had a variety of chemicals that they discharged into the waters. And so we made them do pre-treatment at their own facilities. They have their own little sub-treatment plant. And that's what this program is. It's a little bit more elaborate. It requires a lot more attention on what they discharge. And so we will be doing extra sampling, and we will need consulting assistance. And that's what those two line items reflect, the professional service as well as extra testing in the lab and safety. The workman's comp, you also see it's going up a little bit. That's, again, the contractual obligations and reflections of the insurance for the two employees of the finance department. A substance here also, small dollars, but nonetheless, a big decrease percentage is the auto parts. As you recall, last year we bought a couple of nice pieces of equipment for, long overdue replacement for some of the sewer jet, as well as another pickup that we had. And so because we have a newer fleet, I decided to reduce some of the line item for the auto parts. I don't think we'll be needing as much. And if next year we see that it's, again, don't need as much repairs, we'll also decrease it again on that line item. Heating and fuel is, again, it's just, a better reflection of our energy needs to keep the plant at certain temperatures to make sure our valves and equipment, we don't need a lot of heat, but we do need a certain temperatures to maintain the plant, at comfortable levels. The other section of interest is new equipment. So under new equipment, there are some equipment pieces that we would like to get this year. And these are items that are not found in the capital line item because they're all under $10,000 expenditures. So we have pumps, like air pumps, that we're going to need for a few sections in our facilities. And we have some flow meters that we also need, and sludge flow meters and meters at a particular pump station. And another thing we use is grinder pumps. People that are in our collection system that were part of the expansion program that took place between 1998 and around 2012. Some homes can't meet gravity flow from their house to the sewers in the street, so they require a pump from the to pump up to the collection system. And so, as part of their expansion program, that was a thing that the councils at the time decided that we would provide the pump for those households. So we get we're going through about 3 to 4 these last few years. I mean, those are coming to an end. Most of those properties are already connected, so we don't have many to go. But again, it's part of the new equipment. Everything is under $10,000 every piece of equipment. Like one of the blowers is $3,200. A second blower is $5,000, and the meters about $6,500 each. So that's part of the new equipment. The next line items, it decreases actually, and that's the telephone and communications. So through Wendy Schmidl's efforts, fiber optics was installed to the treatment plant, which now we have direct communications, and we could forego having to go through a private utility and paying those charges. So we're able to reduce the line item considerably due to this fiber optics that was installed. The billing and collections, that goes along with the salaries that I've mentioned earlier. This line item in the past had a component that was like just a transfer to the general taxes as an income item in an expenditure on our sheets. But now that line item is gone, and we're just going to direct charge the salaries and their benefits. The next item of low percentage increase but of substance is the tipping fees. And that's basically our sludge. Every day we clean the water and we create all this extra sludge that has to be handled. Many, many years ago, it was landfilled. We would dewater it, and it was landfilled. We can no longer go to the central landfill with that. So what we have is we have the sludge, a very thick liquid sludge that's trucked off-site to a facility in Woonsocket. It's privately managed and hauled, and we pay by the ton for the sludge and the transportation. So that's a contractual obligation that we have with them, and so that's increasing 3.5%. The line item for capital outlay, obviously this year is substantially less than the prior year, since we're not purchasing this year, a sewer vac truck or pickup trucks. We've reduced the line item considerably, but nonetheless, there's still 3 items that we would like to get through the capital program. The first one is a testing sampler. I don't know if all of you received a photograph. I apologize, I didn't put it as an attachment for the budget, but I try to send it to the town council. 2 photographs of what these items look like. And what a test sampler basically is, we would, if we go to any particular business and we want to see what kind of flow they're giving us, and if there's any violation of the chemical constituencies, we would put this device that has nothing but a big bottle on the inside with periodic sampling, and it goes into this bottle for composite sampling, and we could leave it there all day long, taking samples periodically and filling this bottle, and then we would have it analyzed to see if there was any violations of our pretreatment or the local limits program. So we would like to get one to help us with sampling as part of the pretreatment program. That line item is about $18,000 for that sampler. It's not cheap, but it's something we definitely need. The second line item, which I was not able to get a photograph for, it's our disinfection system. As you know, we disinfect our wastewater through ultraviolet radiation, and we have a probe that measures the flow, and it's through a process called the transmissivity of the water. So the concentration of UV, we can amplify it or we can reduce it to save energy, and it depends on how much transmissivity or how much particular matter may be flowing in the sample. So when there's a lot of particular matter, we ramp up the disinfection. When it's lower, we reduce it, so it saves a substantial amount of energy, because UV is very heavy in usage of electricity, so wherever we can get some savings. But what we don't have is an extra probe that does that measurement for us, that automatic measurement, and we need to get one, and unfortunately it is $20,000. It requires annual cleaning and rehab that has to be done off-site by a representative of the manufacturer. So during that time frame, we're only down to one probe, and we need to have two for the two banks of our UV. This will be a backup that we need, especially during those instances when we need to take it offline to be rehabbed. So it's we need to get that component. And the next item that I'm looking for is what we call a solids pump. It is a portable pump that we take around the treatment plant when we need to pump down a few tanks or transfer large quantities of water from one tank to the other, or if we ever have to do bypass pumping in the collection system where we have a problem with a manhole and we have to pump around that manhole, we need this kind of pump. It's a portable pump. It has different names. People refer to it as bypass pumps, sludge pumps, solids pumps, but it is a trailer-mounted solids pump that we need to have. We have the original pump from when the plant was upgraded in 1988. It's long overdue. You know, I don't even know if we can even get parts anymore to repair the one we have. So this would be a replacement for that pump, and that's $40,000 for that particular pump. The next item of interest that I would draw the council's attention is down below under the debt service. As you can see, we have gone down substantially in debt service. That's from the retirement of one of our bonds, the 1999 issued bond. It retired this past year. So next year's debt service will go down, as you can see, by $430,000. A small piece of the $4.5 million bond will be in that component, and next year will reflect the full year of the $4.5 million bond that was approved, and we've begun that program this year for the rehabilitation of our treatment plant. Along with the bonds, I would draw your attention, Matt, if you could go back a few sheets to the revenue sheets. Yeah, it's probably 4 or 5 pages before. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Right there, I'm sorry, it's sidewards, but that's the sheet. This is our revenue sheet. And along with the reduction of the debt service of the bond, the retirement of the bond, so goes a little bit of revenue that you will see at the bottom where it says sewer assessments. That has gone down 19%. So what happens is when we issued these bonds, it was for sewers that were installed in various sections of our collection system. And what our collection system encompasses is basically Route 2, all the way from New England Tech to the Beacon Diner, or say around Route 4 on Route 2. And east of Route 2, we've captured probably 95% of the homes and the properties east of Route 2 and Route 2. And so when we installed in the various projects, when we installed the sewers in front of these properties, we would assess the individual households by the overall cost of the project. So whatever the cost was to install sewers in that neighborhood, we divided it amongst the properties, and everybody was assessed a certain amount to recapture the cost of the sewers. The town did subsidize quite a bit of that as well, so it wasn't 100% of the cost. But that's why the revenue sheet doesn't necessarily meet the same dollar value as the debt amount that's being reduced by. But nonetheless, as we retire that bond, the assessments that people have 20 years to pay are also retiring. So people have made their last payment as part of that project. So it is also reflected here in the assessments. So the overall budget, as you can see, went from about 4.6 million last year to around 4.07 this year, and that's because of the expenditure reduction. Some of the line items in here, there are some miscellaneous revenues that I had communications with Ms. Sutherland, and she believes that these are some good projections on miscellaneous revenue, interest on delinquent of the users that haven't kept up with their payments. So those are some of the line items that are increasing. The other item I wanted to speak of was the user fees. So that's the biggest revenue component, is the revenue that we receive from user fees. And every year we bill everybody based on the water consumption of their properties, and that's residential, governmental, industrial, and the commercial types that we have. We send them a bill based on their water usage. So this year or next year's budget is going to be very interesting, because the revenue projections for next year are based on the water flows of this year, the calendar year, and we do calendar year, January to December. And so if you take this year's water consumption, that's the basis for next year's FY21 budget revenue. And of interest in those items is the effects of COVID. So as you all know, most people were home from the middle of March to say around May, where some businesses were beginning to open up again in a phased approach, a very slow phased approach. So it's very difficult to project what the flows are going to be for next year. So what I typically do is I take a look at, the last 3 years, the last 5 years flows, the averages of those flows. I look at revenue, I look at trends. Is the flows going upwards, going downwards? And so I make a projection every year. I make a projection based on trends, based on the averages, whatever bits and pieces of information I can get. And I make my projections on every line item, meaning every revenue section, meaning residential has a component. We have two types of businesses, what we call commercial A, which is, let's say commercial B is our restaurant, basically. Commercial A is all other types of commercial businesses that don't have very rich, heavy waste. It's just basically domestic waste. And then governmental, which is basically our schools, New England Tech, our churches and their flows. And then the other two line items are the industrial, where we have some industrials that, again, it's industrial in nature, but they're not really giving us processed water. And we call those industrial A. In our industrial B would be like what we had on Semi and Stanley Bossage that gave us processed water. We still have some of those, but there's very little constituents in that, in any of those flows. So it was difficult to project. I communicated with King County Water. When I first put the budget together back in April and May, at the time, they only had the first quarter readings, obviously. And those were not good readings because, as you know, January and February was a solid month. Nothing was closed. Everything was business as usual. And then really the concern started in middle of March. And at the time, King County, we couldn't surmise what the effects were going to be because we only had half of March in there. So recently I've revised our flow projections. I've called King County, and again, I try to work with Mr. Simmons, the general manager, to see what direction flows are going to be. And he had some revenue for the second quarter of interest, whereby the residential components had gone up as much as 14%, but the governmental had gone down about 30% in flows, and the non-residential flows, the commercials, had gone down as much as 50% of revenues for the second quarter. So to project out the full year, the only way to do it is really to get more flows, maybe the third quarter, which is, you know, there's no way we're going to do that and try to pass a budget right now. So what I did is I did my usual projections that I do for the various flow types, residential and so on. And then I put a factor in there, what I think would be realistic for those components, such as, so for the residential, I bumped up the flows for the residential about 10%. So whatever I projected, I said, you know, I think it's going to go up by 10%. And that's the projection I did for the residential line items. For the businesses that are not restaurant related, but other types of businesses, the commercials, I anticipated that there will probably be a 30% loss in revenues coming, because I think there will be a 30% reduction of flows for those types of businesses. Residents were able to open up slightly with takeout, so there was some activity. There was some activity there, so I projected in about 72%. Governmental, meaning schools, they were shut down, so we lost all of April, May, and you know, half of March, half of June. So I'm thinking there's about 3 months worth of loss of flows from the schools and that. And so I projected them to, assuming we're coming back in September, to the degree that it's going to be coming back, I expect maybe 75% of the flows only from projected flows. The industrial accounts, they really didn't close down, but obviously everybody felt some loss of business across the board. So I projected them at 85% of the overall flows. So in general, where I projected the flows to be, they're about almost 1 million cubic feet less, which is about, you know, 7.5, 7.6 million gallons less that we're going to have to charge against. So the line item for user fees reflects that. What I had mentioned as the items that are going to be, the flows that are going to be reduced, I put it in there. So, I mean, that can be played around some more, but I think to be realistic and conservative, and yet, so if the flows turn out to be a little bit more, there'll be a little bit extra revenue. If they come in less, I think these numbers are good enough that it won't be a big reflection on a budget. And I think I'm at least comfortable to come to the council with this budget and the revenue projections that I'm submitting to the council, because the residential accounts did go up quite a bit. And I, you know, in my communicating with Mr. Simmons from the King County Water Authority, we both come to an agreement. He originally was saying that there's about a net neutral on commercial, I mean, residential and non-residential. I think we're going to have some revenue loss because of flow reduction. So I'm comfortable presenting these flows to the town council. So that's pretty much the budget. And I can go over any line item the council may have.
I just have one question. This is Renu. I was curious if I think you touched upon it already. The going forward, the idea that perhaps some of these businesses would not be still fully operational and the schools would not be fully operational. I think you did touch on that, and would that also be reflected going forward as well in your 21 numbers, because of perhaps they would be at 60 to 75% capacity as opposed to, and the residential would still be higher because of the offsetting of the at home versus going to work or going to school?
Yeah, so according to Kent County, their residential account was actually 14% higher than normal. Their normal was comparing to last year. Right. So they were 14% increase. Couple that with the first quarter's readings, and it would be around that 15% plus increase. I think we're going to have more people going back to work, I hope. I think some of our businesses will come back. So I think the overall increase for the residential. I didn't do 14%. I'm projecting only 10% increase because there'll be less at-home operations and people going back to work. And that's kind of reflective. I also saw that in our solid waste. I saw some increase in our residential pickups that went up quite a bit. Again, quite a bit by 10 to 15%. So I'm comfortable to say at the end of the year, the residential will probably just go up 10%. And the commercial, although very low that first and second quarter reading, as much as 30 to 50% in Kent County's estimation. I think by the time you blend the third and fourth quarter, assuming things are not going to be back to 100% normal, but it'll be a bigger increase, I'm comfortable to do, anywhere from 15% to 30% reduction, depending on the type of business. And that is reflected on this revenue projection.
Thank you. I just want to say that I appreciate the hard work that goes into this. I know the state of our little cove depends on this, so I really appreciate the hard work that went into it, and thank you.
Mark?
Other questions for Mr. Duhart?
Mark, I don't know if you can see me. I'm waving.
Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Sure. Joe, I was just wondering, since when you typically make your projections on, like, think about water usage and consumption that drives the fees, it's a lot more of a static circumstance than you have right now. And I know you're doing your best to make your predictions. They are the predictions that every other part of our town government's trying to make, and I guess all of us individually. What happens? What's your ability mid-year if it turns out that the projections are off and you need revenue? What's the plan for that? How does that work?
Right now, well, what happens is the billing is going to happen next year in April. So we'll be approaching already the end of the fiscal year. What I can do is we already received some flows from Kent County. So I have the first quarter and the second quarter, and that's how I arrived at these numbers. So what we can do again is go look at the third quarter and see where the flows are at that point. I'm assuming the budget can get approved, let's say, by the next council meeting, so we're able to function in the sewer department. But if we did that, I don't know if that's something Ms. Sunderland or Mr. Nada can speak to, as if we have the ability to go back and make adjustments to the budget. I don't know if Andy wants to chime in on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Joe. So Mike, what we did is, as you can tell, Joe spent a tremendous amount of time massaging these numbers and really working with Kent County. So what we've done on our end on the municipal side is we're holding off, although you've approved of various expenditures on capital and others. I'll work with Joe to be able to hold off on certain expenditures to kind of mitigate any potential gaps that we may see. I think we feel, and you could tell from Joe's comments, pretty confident that we brought the range of potential variability down somewhat based on Kent County's numbers and the differences in the lack of reduction on the commercial side and increase in the residential use. So I think we're feeling pretty good at this point that any variability that still exists, we'll be able to massage that within the existing $4 million budget that we have. I don't think it's going to be of such a large degree, and I say that today just because of the pre-work that Joe did up front and his staff, that we'll be able to manage that should it happen. If it was, $500,000 or more, that would be a number I think you're referring to that would be a little beyond our ability, and we may have to be looking at other rate changes at some particular point in time, or looking at, and I think was referenced in our last audit, where the town may have to be involved to help the sewer division get through a period of time before we can adjust billing and make those funds back up. So I think we're okay at the moment based on the pre-work that was done.
So Andy, given that the way it's structured, right, it's not tax revenues that run the sewer plant, it's actually the user fees.
Correct. Yep.
Is it? I guess what I'm trying to understand is more of a not whether or not the estimates are good ones. So I know you guys have done a great job. Joe's fabulous. I trust that that's going to be plus or minus.
Yes.
I was just wondering if, due to the kind of dubious nature of all of our projections here, is there, if they fall short, that's what I was trying to figure out. Does, for instance, the sewer authority have the ability to adjust rates midstream? Does it revise projections and do that? If the town has to use tax revenue to provide the sewer authority to function, is that in the nature of a loan because it's tax revenue supporting sewer fee-based expenses? Would that then be repaid by the sewer fees in the next? I just don't understand exactly how that all works.
Yeah, it would have to be, Mike. Yeah, I mean, the tax base is in no position to subsidize an enterprise fund. So, and the third option would be is to actually direct borrow funds from a third party outside in the market to be able to backfill until the rates could be adjusted. So I think we have the ability to do all of those. I think it would be premature for, I think, us to comment on what we'd be most comfortable with today. Probably would depend on the amount and the circumstance, but I think each of the scenarios you just laid out are all possible. Rate changes midstream at an appropriate time, additional borrowing, or at times the loaning of funds from within the organization itself to be repaid, to be paid back. So I think we've got some flexibility to be able to do those, but we'd have to dive into the options and look at the pros and cons at the time, should we be faced with that kind of challenge.
Okay, but there's no legal restriction to doing a mid-year rate change or any of that? That's not a legal, there's no legal impediment to that?
Not that, if Trish or Andy can weigh in, not that I'm aware of. Trish, do you happen to be aware of any potential limitation that we may have to an adjust sewer rate based on circumstance change?
No, I would think it would be similar to supplemental tax bill.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's important only because, if that happens, that's unlikely to be the only hole in the dike that we have to put a finger in.
Right.
And so I just was trying to understand if this is one of those that we'd have to do with tax revenue in a year and then to get it back, or how that would work. But if we can adjust that, at any point when it's reasonable to do so, and Joe thinks that's appropriate, that answers my question. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Other questions?
I'll be trying to get the water flows from King County as best as we can. I'll try to get that information every quarter, just as a checks and balances along the way.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Nice job.
Other questions for Mr. Duarte? Can't see everybody at the same time, so just if you do have a question, just let me know. Joe, I do have a question for you, or maybe for Trish. If Matt can go back to page 67 for a minute under capital outlay. The question I have is, if you look at under operations, it looks like underneath of operations, there's a number of sub-accounts. And then you get to capital outlay. That looks like it's a sub-account under operations. And then infrastructure improvements and debt service don't have any accounts. So are they separate accounts, or are they sub-accounts under operations? I think you have to go down a little. What page are you on?
You got to go down, yeah.
Yeah, do you see at the bottom there? Capital outlay, is that a sub-account, Trish? And then where do infrastructure improvements and debt service, how are they accounted for?
So infrastructure improvements will be a new account number. Right now, we don't have an org for that. And this all falls under the same org 2095 0535. So that's the org at the top where it says operations, and the numbers below that are the object codes. Okay,
so infrastructure and debt service will each get a sub-account or a code underneath of that 2095.
Yes, I think what Joe typically does is he keeps capital separate from operating. In his
from an accounting position, What's that?
Just in presentation. I think he
Okay.
likes to keep maintenance and operations separate from capital.
Okay, and then debt service, is that its own category or is it part of operation?
It's pretty much part of capital.
Okay,
Usually in the past, it's like Trish said, there, it's the biggest line items. People have interest as to what's being spent, considering the how much those line items can be. So we separated. Also, I didn't mention anything about the infrastructure improvements, but we want to make sure that there's a line item specific for a fund to help defray some of the costs, capital costs in the future. So we're just going to put 50,000 this year, but hopefully we can increase that over time so that we don't have to borrow as much in the future and take away some of those peak expenditures and use this fund to offset any future infrastructure.
okay. Good, good. I think you covered a lot of ground here, Joe. I just wondered if you could make a comment on the plant capacity. We've been concerned on and off as the town development expands, that we might run into problems with capacity. And then you mentioned to me earlier today that it's not only the quantity of the wastewater that we're receiving, but the quality of it. That some of the effluent from a high biological oxygen demand could tax the capacity of the plant as well. Can you comment on that?
Yes, Dr. Schwager. So basically, our treatment plant has the ability to treat 1.7 million gallons a day. Obviously, hydraulically, we can handle more flow than that, but from a treatment capability, it's 1.7 million. And we've been using that number going back to several RIPTES permits that were issued to the town going back to early 2000s. The concern, and so over time, there's always been this development that may want more capacity, especially outside of the borders of East Greenwich. They may want extra capacity. So we always have to keep our eyes open on that 1.7 million. What happened with the local limits report that we have to do this year, including the pre-treatment program, what we're looking at is one constituency, which is called biological oxygen demand, BOD. That particular measurement is coming in a little richer than had been previously anticipated, which is required us to do the new local limits report. And we next year, although DEM to approve that report needed us to make some changes or at least review our facilities plan this year, I was able to push that off into fiscal year 2022, because what happens with a facilities plan, it's like the comprehensive plan for the community. It's everything wastewater for the town. So the collection system, the treatment plant, everything to do with that is outlined in the facilities plan. And what DEM wants us to do is go back again and revisit that whole plan and reestablish the findings, make sure they're still consistent, and the treatment plant still has the same capacity. Is the driving force going to be 1.7 million gallons, or is it going to come down a little bit because the BOD is now coming in richer than we anticipated? And so we're going to be looking through the pre-treatment program and redoing that plan. We're going to determine if we're on target with a 1.7. So we will know better by the end of next year, fiscal year, where we stand as far as the overall capacity of the plant. Right now, we can comment and say some things as the capacity, but the thing that's driving this the most is our breweries that want to come to this town. The type of plant that we have doesn't really allow for heavy BOD loading from these institutions. And so we have to be careful. And where before I was basically just looking at the flow quantity coming from the sites, I now have to pay greater attention to their chemical constituency, especially BOD. So the local limits report will get us so far, but DEM is not going to approve that plan completely until we do the facilities plan. Now, the reason I keep going back to that facilities plan is obviously that's going to be a big driver, but it's a very expensive report. It's about $200,000 just to put that report together. And so I told the DEM there's no way we could fit it in this year with the effect of COVID and how that's going to be detrimental on our revenue projections. I couldn't imagine taking on $200,000 expenditure. So we were able to push it off to next year, and DEM is agreeable to that. They are going to give us local limits approval for the BOD, and only for those industries such as distilleries and breweries. And the complete report won't be approved until we do the facilities plan. The facilities plan, like I said, is very expensive. It usually takes about 12 months to complete. So we will be into 2022, most likely, when the report will be completed, again, at the cost of $200,000. But that's another concern for the town. We want to see if we have to get more restrictive on our pretreatment program. So do we need to go back to restaurants and be a little bit more restrictive on some of their flows? These are things that we're going to look at. I mean, it's too premature to even say that right now. I mean, it's there, that possibility is there, but we have to look at our collection system, where the sources of BOD could be coming from, and that's where, for instance, that sampler is going to help us out. We can go to the individual businesses, we can go to certain sections of our collection system, such as Main Street, and see what kind of flows and the concentrations coming from Main Street, because as you know, it's quite heavy in restaurants. So for us, we need to see what kind of an effect that's having towards the plant. And then do we have other target areas we want to go? So it's important that we pay attention, not just hydraulically, the 1.7 million gallons, but also from a BOD standpoint. I know when New England Tech was coming together with their facilities, one of the things that they wanted to have is, rather than get rid of the kitchen waste, they wanted to use, for lack of a better term, a garbage disposal that would grind up all of their food waste and send it down to the treatment facility. And what we found in that kind of process, it was very, very heavy BOD, and we had to turn them down then. And so, I mean, that's the last thing we want to do, is start turning businesses away. But we really need to concentrate on the type of businesses such as breweries and the effects they could have at our treatment plant, because they could have a very negative effect really quickly if all of a sudden we had a bunch of breweries and distilleries coming into town, and industries that could be very critical in the BOD loading. So we're also paying attention to that when people come to us for capacity availability. We're also looking at that BOD as a concern for capacity.
But your best estimate of capacity is going to have to await that facilities plan. Is that right? So it may be a little bit down the road.
Yes, it'll be a little further down the road. So we're still using the 1.7 million and keeping our eye on the breweries. But with the breweries, I mean, with the local limits approval, DEM is making us change our ordinance, industrial wastewater ordinance. And so I'll be coming to the council in the very near future. I'm hoping by the end of August, council meeting in August, where we're putting limits, daily limits on these breweries. So, for instance, right now, our ordinance is concentration based. You can't give it a concentration greater than such. What we're going to do is, rather than concentration, because none of these breweries will meet that criteria. So our ordinance right now says you can only give us this concentration. Any amount over, you're going to pay extra. Well, that doesn't set a ceiling on the BOD, and that's what we're concerned about, is the total BOD. We're not so much concerned about how much revenue we can make from that. So what we want to do is we want to put a daily limit, such as, say, 20 pounds a day. A brewery can't generate more than 20 pounds a day of BOD. And so we're going to be putting limits like that. And all breweries, let's say that if they came to town, DM is saying we can't go above 100 pounds a day. So that is a limiting factor for our town. We want to be business friendly, but we have to be selective on the businesses. Breweries and distilleries, however interesting and good for any community, entertainment and otherwise, we have to be a little bit more cautious as to the number that could come to our community. So that's the kind of limitations DM is forcing us into. So that helps us get by until a facilities plan is fully implemented. We may just find out that we're going to be okay, or we may have to make adjustments, but that 20 pounds a day, 100 pounds a day collectively for breweries will get us through the next couple of years until the facilities plan is completed.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Duhigg? Mr. Donegan?
Joe, when you issue the permits to breweries or any sort of commercial user here, what's the term on those?
So we like to have 1 year permits. So the one brewer we have right now, unfortunately, because it's licensed through the state and not through the clerk's office, kind of slipped through the cracks. You know, basically they got electrical permits and a little plumbing permits, and we didn't even catch them until they were fully operational. So it's now we have to work our way back. We have an established business, and we have to work our way back and give them a permit, a local limits permit, and those are going to be annual permits. And we will monitor them. What we're looking for is to have monitoring capabilities specific to that business and not the whole building. Because right now the building they're in has multiple businesses, and we have to isolate their flows. So it will require infrastructure, capital expenditures that they need to do. So it's becoming very interesting recently in doing that. And we're going to try to work with them and, you know, get them to a timetable. But the permit will be annual. It'll be an annual permit where we will have the ability to monitor, digest what they give us, and then make changes along the way. And so that's what we're looking for.
So I think you're heading in the right direction. So I have clients that have the same BOD, COD problems that are challenging for one in Woonsocket and one for NBC's system. And in those instances, what happened was as they're working through the local limits, we ended up with permits that are just designated, the limits are interim limits. And I didn't know if we're doing that as well.
We will do, it would be annual. It'll be annual amounts. I mean, one of the things I think we can do with them, because their flows are very low. Right now, the brewery has very little flows. Our capacity still is significantly large enough to handle them at this point. The concern is if, like, all of a sudden we have 2 breweries and 1 distillery that wanted to go online.
Yeah.
That's a concern, because 3 of them, and then pretty soon it could be more, because it's becoming a thing. The breweries are becoming very popular. And so what we're doing is we would issue them a 1 year permit, and we would always issue them a 1 year permit.
So then you're not worried about the vesting of any rights because it's only a 1 year?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really given them any rights right now. We've already put them on notice that we are a little concerned with the BOD levels that they have, and they have to start working towards their own pre-treatment program. We've asked them to hire a consultant. We've asked them to have the consultant come back, give us flow projections and treatment devices that they will have to put in. And that's becoming a very slow process. They're not, I mean, I don't want to say anything, but they're kind of slow in their way of getting to us. And we would be willing to work with them, because at this point, we have no other breweries on board. So we can work with this one in a timely, phased-in approach. And if we had to give an interim quantity, we would. I already gave them that. I already sent them a letter that said 20 pounds a day. That letter's already going out to them, and we want them to start now doing what they have to achieve that. Unfortunately, we didn't have the ordinance with teeth to say that. We now.
So Joe, so you're doing you're doing concentration-based and mass loading per day?
So we will do both, because what we're hoping to do is total loading, pounds per day, because the concentration breweries are not going to meet. Our concentrations are like 300 milligrams per liter. They're not going to meet it. These people are in the thousands of milligrams per day. They're not going to meet it. So what we rather do is have them have like a storage tank, let's say, and their discharge waters would go into this tank, and it will trickle into our system at a slow volume of water that would be equal to, and there's mathematical equations that we can do to the 20 pounds a day. So that's why they need a consultant to come on board and say, we will be able to trickle this much rate of discharge that would be equal to 20 pounds a day. That's what we're looking
So
for.
you're trying,
That's not cheap.
right, so Joe, you're trying to avoid the slugs, right?
Oh, absolutely. Slugs
Right.
would be devastating to us.
Right.
You know, say typically what their waste is they don't like to waste anything, like any business. So they're going to get rid of the solids. They're going to give that to local farmers who feed. And what's left over is basically wash water and any residue that may be in the tanks. But those residues can still be very large in BOD. Over time, it can be of a significance. Their pH is usually very low as well because of the cost of cleaners that they use. So we want them to store the stuff, their waste, and then trickle it to our facility in a managed way so that it doesn't exceed 20 pounds a day. Their concentrations wouldn't make it. They're very, very high in concentrations.
Hey, Joe, if they're producing more than they're trickling out, what happens to that storage tank?
They have to
Well,
stop
that's
production
why-
work.
What's that?
Well,
They have to stop production. Their limit is, they
Yeah.
will have to know their retention capacity, calculate that, and they have to shut it off. And if they don't, what'll happen is they'll keep it flowing through. They'll exceed the permit, we violate them.
yeah, we're going to require that whatever their consultant gives us for tanks, it makes sense. We don't want them to build a tank for the business now. We're looking for the business when it peaks out, say 5 years, 6 years from now. We're looking for the capacity of their facility. How much can they actually produce? And even though they may be at 20% capacity right now, the tank sizing better be the peak capacity of their facility, so that we don't run into that issue where they have to shut down. They will shut down because they've reached capacity, not because they're trickling down is their production is greater than what they can trickle. They will have to size that now. We won't let them size anything smaller than that. It wouldn't make sense.
Other questions for Mr. Duar? Council Corenthal. You have to unmute Karen.
Yeah, this is a little confusing to me, but Joe, if we have 1.7 million gallons capacity, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing you saying is the major contributor to increasing our numbers, the businesses and particularly the breweries. What about though we're doing a lot of building? Is it commercial? The commercial people you're not so concerned about that?
Right. So what we look at, for instance, a household can generate about 300 milligrams per liter of BOD. That's a typical household. A brewery can generate thousands and thousands of 10, 12, 15,000 milligrams per liter of BOD. So what we look at it that way. So when we have residences come in, they're really not heavy laden BOD. Many of the businesses that we're getting is basically bathroom waste. We do consider, for instance, clinics. We want to make sure that their discharges are not heavy in BOD. So our pretreatment program is going to start paying more attention to clinics. Dentist offices can be not necessarily BOD, but other constituencies. So we're going to be looking at that. But really, even like the battery facility that's in the old on semiconductor facility, their waste was basically just bathrooms. A lot of our medical buildings a lot of it is bathrooms. So it's a very low, what we call low strength waste. It's very domestic, what we call more domestic waste, and not heavy, like the breweries can be. Another type of business, car washes could also generate a significance. I think, I don't know if our boating industry is having an effect on us during startup and closing of the season. All of a sudden we see these spikes of BOD that come to us in the spring and summer. So we don't know if we have to stop paying attention to them, when they flush their tanks and so forth, and they may have antifreeze in there. So again, alcohol-based products will be very high in BOD. So a lot of the developments we're having, we're not as concerned. That fits pretty much within the 1.7 million gallon capacity and the constituencies that went along with that, the treatable quantity of 1.7. But it's the other businesses we're now a little concerned, like the breweries. We're concerned what they could mean overall, because if they eat up the BOD, then 1.7 doesn't mean anything anymore. That number could shrink down sizably, and that's a concern then. So that's why we have to do the facilities plan over to see where we stand, where we're going to be standing a few years from now.
Other questions for Mr. Duarte? Mr. Donegan?
You're muted.
Mike, you have to unmute, Michael.
Hi, Joe. Sorry about that. Joe, while we're talking about capacity, do you remember we had a long talk about what the available capacity was? And during that discussion, we were looking at infiltration and whether we wanted to ever have a program that might start to try to capture fees to begin to have some almost a capital program to build up to limit the rain infiltration that's contributing so much to our flows. Any thought to that? Any progress? Any steps we're taking in that? And should we be taking some if we're not?
Well, that's why that infrastructure improvements fund, I'm looking at that, because honestly, the treatment plant program, the improvements we've been doing, I don't know if we could ever build up a fund big enough to handle the immediate needs of the treatment plant. So we still bonded. There's 4.5 million. There's going to be other bonding. I think in not in too distant future, we may need to do more, such as the envelope of the building may need some attention, and the section of the building that removes nitrogen. Well, that was done in 2006. Some of those components are now going to be nearing their life. And although this $4.5 million bond is going to handle some of that, there's other components that are going to start coming to the end of life. And we have to start looking at what kind of funding. Who knows, they may need another bond, several years from now, not right away. But the collection system where we would have most of that I&I, this is what that infrastructure improvements plan would be good for. If we could fund, say, $100,000 a year, set that aside, that would help handle some of the sections. So we did an aggressive program back in the early to mid 2000s where we did quite a bit of I&I elimination. Obviously, we have more to do. And we notice that now, these drought conditions, we can see the flow go down quite a bit because the groundwater levels are so low as a result of that. So we're beginning to see the effects of what I&I can have on our capacity. So again, we're under 1 million gallons a day right now. So we have still quite a bit of capacity. And it's something we need to start looking at. The BOD, the hydraulic capacity of the facility. So these are the things we're looking at now. And it's good that we start putting these funds aside just for that purpose that you mentioned, the I&I. This way we can find out the sections that need to be treated. And then we would take from the fund and go treat those sections. The last time, the aggressive program we had, we did multiple sections in our old system, and it was about $1.8 million worth of work. We can do that over a course of time. So annually, we would do so much, like we would do a paving program. Rather than do $5 million worth of paving, 20, 30 roads, we will do, 2 or 3 or 6 roads. So we'll do the same thing with the I&I. We will take the bad sections and we fix them as we go, but hopefully through this infrastructure improvement program.
Okay, thank you.
Can't hear you, Dr. Schrager.
Sorry about that. So I'll make sure that we do get public comment to satisfy the provisions of the public hearing. But I need to get input from the manager, solicitor, and the council on how to proceed here. We have the ability, I think, to close this public hearing and vote on the bond tonight. In conversations with the manager, there was a suggestion that we continue the public hearing to give the public who may not had an opportunity to participate tonight, the opportunity to comment at our next meeting in August. So I wanted to get input. Mr. Nada, can you comment on that and maybe advise us on our options here?
Sure. Lee had gone through and taken a good look at what the requirements, the technical requirements are for approving this budget on an annual basis. And I think what she found is that we really had not been following them on point for a number of years. So what the requirement is that there be a public hearing and that ultimately at a subsequent meeting, the budget be approved by resolution. So you've got an option tonight to, if you'd like, to close the hearing, come back at the next available meeting and just approve it via resolution, or based on our conversation, if in fact the community hasn't had time to digest this budget, which just was posted several days ago, and they wanted some time, you could leave it open, continue the hearing, see if anybody comes out at the next meeting, wrap up the hearing, close it, and approve it by resolution. You could do that all at the next meeting, which I think which would be in late August, which will again be a fairly light meeting. So you've got two options based on how you'd like to approach it. I think customarily there are not. I think based on how Joe explained it, there are very few areas within this budget that there's actually room for modification, and most of it's being driven based on this conversation that we just had on pretreatment and impact, right, on capacity and other collection system issues. So in the development of a reserve fund. So beyond that, there's probably going to be little input, but you do have that ability. So it's really up to the deference of the council as to how you'd like to approach it. Close it tonight or continue it, close it at the next meeting and approve by resolution.
Input from the council? My initial leaning is to continue the public hearing, and then we reopen it at our next meeting, open it up to the public. If there's no additional comments, we close the public hearing, and then we vote to adopt the sewer budget.
Mark, I support that as well.
So do I.
Yep, thank you.
Good. So we seem, Councilor Engelhardt, are you comfortable with that?
No, I'm good with that. I think that it gives people an opportunity.
So what I'd look for is a motion to continue the public hearing to our next meeting date. That's another topic of discussion. We do have a meeting on the books now for August 4th. Is that right, Lee?
I'm
sorry, August 14th. Is that the next date?
Hold on. I think it's the 11th.
Tuesday following the Monday holiday.
So that would be the 11th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And then the next meeting after that is August
24th.
24th. So there has been some sentiment to cancel the August 4th meeting. So I would ask our solicitor, can we discuss our meeting schedule here as part of this agenda item, Andy?
Yes and no. Sorry. There we go. Background noise, sorry. I think you could, I think you can certainly discuss it. I don't think you can discuss it as part of this agenda item. You just have to add it to the agenda. Yeah. So if you want to just hold this, if you want to recess this for 2 minutes while you add an item to the agenda as far as rescheduling the next council meeting, that would be okay.
And we would add it under new business, or would it be added under a separate agenda item?
I think you could, it doesn't really matter because you're adding it. So it would technically be under new business, but you're going to take it up now.
Okay, so why don't we add an agenda item under new business? That's item 9 on the agenda. So I'd look for a motion to add for discussion purposes only an agenda item.
No, you're adding it for, in this case, the one thing that you can do is you can discuss scheduling. As far as that sort of thing that you can do outside the open meetings. I mean, you're talking about deciding now whether you're going to have that meeting or not, but that's okay because it's just scheduling. Right. So I think you can add that for action. Otherwise, you can't do it. You got to meet on August 11th. But you could have for example, when you have the clerk poll the members, it's not a rolling quorum when it's scheduling only. So, and I'm probably being overly cautious just adding it to the agenda, but we just had something else happen with one of our towns last week where they got even more picky with the Attorney General. So I'd like to say you're going to add it to the agenda, but it's for purposes of scheduling only.
Yes, I appreciate your recommendations, and we're breaking new ground here in Open Meeting Act process. So I'm going to ask for a motion to add under new business an item related to discussion and vote on upcoming town council meeting dates.
So moved.
So a motion by Mr. Donegan, second by Councilor Corenthal. So we'll take a roll call. Corenthal?
Aye.
Councilor Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella? Chair votes aye. So motion carries 5-0. So in discussion of this agenda item, as I mentioned, August, I've got my dates mixed up here, but whatever that date was, August 11th.
August 11th is the next council meeting.
Yes,
That's the Tuesday after VJ Day, which is August 10th.
So I would propose that we cancel that meeting, and then our meeting, next council meeting would be scheduled as a regular meeting for August. Is that the 24th?
Yes.
24th, yes.
Yes.
So I'd ask for comments on that idea. If there's no comment,
I like the idea since I'll be moving my daughter into law school on the 4th.
you could always zoom in from her dorm room. But we will
Give her students a taste of what the law is really about.
We will take that under advisement, and so I'll look for a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Donegan makes the motion. Second,
Second.
Councilor Engelhardt. So Councilor Engelhardt, we'll take a roll call.
Aye.
Councilor Corenthal.
Aye.
Councilor Donegan. Councilor Zarella.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. So we'll now go back to item 8B on the proposed sewer budget. So I'd look for a motion to continue the public hearing until August 24th.
So moved.
Mr. Zarella, seconded by Councilor Donegan. Any further discussion? We need it is a public hearing, so is anyone from the public interested in commenting on discussion up to this point? If you'd like to raise your hand, please do so now under the participant button, and then go to attendees. You'll see a raise your hand. If you're calling in, dial *9. Seeing no hands raised, we'll take a vote on the motion. Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Councilor Corenthal?
Aye.
Councilor Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries 5-0. So we will move on to item 9A. This is part of new business. Oh, I wanted to thank our stenographer, Carol Malaga. You are free and clear now, so thank you for your help.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Carol. Good
night. Under new business, we have recommendation from the finance director to approve a resolution authorizing the town finance director and the president of the town council to issue approximately $31 million of general obligation school refunding bonds. This is an opportunity that exists for the town to refund 2009 and 2012 general obligation bonds issued through the Rhode Island Health and Education Building Corporation, also called RIBEC. And this was for school infrastructure improvements. The anticipated net savings and interest payments to the town is approximately $3.2 million. And the maturity date of the refunding bonds will remain the same. However, the debt service savings will be realized over the remaining life of the bond. So I'd ask our manager or our finance director to give us a little bit more information on this recommendation and the vote to pass a resolution.
Sure, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I want to ask Trish to kind of work through it. And the other thing that Trish also provided, which is not expressly visible on the memorandum is the overall net savings on the town side versus the state savings. So when you break it down, there's prior debt service of just under $41 million, a refunding debt service of a little over $37 million. There's savings that I believe you just referenced of just over $3.7 million. But then when you break down the 35% and the 65%, 35% state savings of about 1.3 million, and the town savings is on 65% of just over 2.45 million. So it's a significant refunding, and I think Trish mentioned it earlier when talking about the capital bonding. The market is ripe right now, and I can't say enough about the work that Trish and her staff in finance has done in terms of taking advantage of the market. You know, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, where not many people look back in time, but you know, you're talking about several $1 million in savings over a fairly tight timeline, over a period of time, which you know, over time it really starts to be real money, and it starts to have a significant positive impact on our ability and how we schedule future debt and how we start to tackle some of the larger projects. So that being said, if Trish can just kind of run us through the $31 million refunding, Trish, and just kind of comment on your experience and kind of what you were seeing in rates and the differences in terms of this refunding, in terms of the bond issuance on the capital side as well.
Sure thing. So I've been working with the financial advisors and with bond counsel on the bank qualified and this refunding. We're looking for a closing in October on this refunding. This is a public negotiated offering issued through Rybeck. And when you're considering a refunding, you typically look for a net present value savings of 3%. But with the market, the given market right now, our estimated savings are well above that at 11.3%. This is really a good time for us. As you know, we're issuing $30 million in bonds. $1.6 million is on the 2009 bonds. They will mature in 4 years. We obviously aren't extending that maturity. We're keeping that the same. And then the 2012 bonds, we're refunding $27.8 million. The 2021 bond is not callable yet because it's not 10 years or older. So we will be issuing that debt this year. And the life of that bond will be the remaining 16 years. The maturity on that bond will be 16 years. So as we've indicated, the savings is 3.7. But we do have to share that with the state. And so what we'll do is provide them with a new amortization schedule for which they will issue a 35% reimbursement on. So that's where the state savings comes in because they're paying us on principal and bonds currently. So we have to revise that amortization and share in those savings. Outside of that, there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done prior to that. We are right now soliciting proposals from an investment banking firm to underwrite the refunding bonds. Our financial advisors will continue to provide town assistance, town oversight of the investment banking firms, but they're separate. They're completely separate entities. This is about an 8-week process. We will need to update the town's official statement. We will need to be getting our bond rating agencies will need to do that, and then go to the market. So outside of that, if anybody has any questions, I'm asking that you approve the resolution that provides the council president and myself the authorization to issue the refunding bonds.
I don't have a question, but I have a statement. I just think that thank you very much to Ms. Sunderland, obviously, for finding the savings. I mean, this is a great thing, especially at this time right now. And this financial situation that we find ourselves in. So thank you.
Sure.
Councilor Cornthal?
Yeah, I just want to also say outstanding work, really. That really is really wonderful, and I appreciate, and I'm sure the town, when they find out, will appreciate, and the state too. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Other questions or comments? There is a resolution as part of the town council agenda, which is linked to the agenda. I'm not going to read the whole resolution, but I will read one or two paragraphs and then ask for a motion to approve the resolution. So this is a resolution, Town of East Greenwich, State of Rhode Island, whereas the town desires to issue general obligation refunding bonds to refund all or any part of the prior bonds which remained outstanding in order to take advantage of the lower interest rates which currently are prevailing. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Director of Finance and the President of the Town Council are hereby authorized to issue the refunding bonds on a taxable basis and deliver them to Rhinebeck. So that is a very abbreviated summary of the resolution. So I'd ask for a motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
I have motion by Mr. Donegan, seconded by Councilor Cornthal. We'll take a roll call. Councilor Engelhardt? Councilor Cornthal?
Aye.
Councilor Donegan?
Well done, Trish. Aye.
Councilor Zrella?
Aye.
And I also vote aye. Trish, the state should give you a little cut on their savings.
Oh, no. No gift.
That would get us in trouble. So motion
Yes, it
carries
would.
5-0. And that resolution is passed. This brings us to item 9B. This is also another recommendation from the Finance Director to award a contract for professional audit services to Blum Shapiro and Company for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020, with the option of auditing its financial statements for each of the 2 subsequent fiscal years in the amount of $177,000. So I'd ask our Finance Director and/or Manager to comment on this recommendation. I know you set forward a number of rigorous criteria for the different bidders to meet, and you consider that before awarding the contract to Blum and Shapiro. So I turn the floor back to Finance Director and Manager to review this with us, and then we'll vote on awarding this contract.
Sure, Mark. Thanks. And I think you can see from the recommendation that Trish has made that each of the things that are happening in finance right now, there are no easy lifts, right? So they are all very involved processes that Trish and her staff are involved in, that ultimately I think we're reaping some significant rewards from. And in each one, we have a small, it's a small success for us. You know, each time we're able to check one of those off and move forward. So in this particular case, Finance Director has provided a recommendation regarding audit services for the next 3 years, and for a number of different reasons. And we've had, for many years, we've used Baxter Dancer and Associates, one of the applicants or one of the firms that have submitted an RFP for this work. They've been with us for about 10 years. That's a significant period of time in terms of utilizing one auditing firm for municipality. And really, when it comes down to best practices, it is definitely time that we holistically look at the level of service and the type of services that they're offering, and look for our own self-reflection and having an objective observer from the outside who has yet to really come in and look at our organization, utilize that opportunity in a review, and most likely it would be probably sooner than what we've done in this particular case. So you had 3 firms. Trish outlined in significant detail the criteria that was utilized, the requirements that are involved in terms of submitting and having sign-off authorization from the Auditor General. Trish provided some of the mandatory criteria that needs to be used as part of this review process, and it covers, I'm not going to read through it all, but it covers a significant amount. It also talks about and outlines a qualification and criteria system utilized by a point system, and how each of the 3 firms that submitted bids, which were Markham, based in Providence, Bloom Shapiro and Company with offices here in Cranston and Rhode Island and West Hartford, as well as Baxter Dancer and Associates from West Warwick. The criteria that was utilized, their bid amounts on year 20, 21, and 22, the total bid amounts that are reflected and submitted, and Bloom Shapiro at 177,000, Baxter Dancer 159,300, and Markham at 197,300. Trish goes on to outline some of the technical aspects, and I'll let her speak to that in particular. And then also she breaks down the scoring criteria in an evaluation grid, which with the reviewers that were involved in this process to really break down an ultimate scoring of Baxter Dancer at 140 points, Bloom Shapiro at 188.34 points, and Markham at 179.68. So I'd love to give Tricia an opportunity, as she really had her hands closest in terms of this review process of all three very reputable firms, to provide some perspective on her recommendation that she's making tonight. Trish?
Sure. Well, there's not much else for me to add, but I have some personal experience in dealing with Bloom Shapiro, and as you know, since I've come on board here in East Greenwich, I've been leading the management and really wanting to bring some new eyes to the way that we're conducting our business, and then sharing some of my thoughts. And I believe that Bloom Shapiro can help with that. They do have a lot of expertise with the Munis system. We've used them before as far as implementation and enhancements in another community. So I know that they can help us with that. They can identify some areas that we really need to focus on. This type of service isn't always all about lowest bid. We're looking at qualifications. We're looking at technical aspects. We're looking at the team that they're going to bring as far as their audit work on site, some internal control testings that we're interested in. So I think their audit approach and their technical and their experience, I think it far outweighs the difference in the total bid price. The qualifications are and experience with Bloom Shapiro are second to none, as you probably can imagine. I think I've tried to expound on that in my recommendation. We've had Baxter Danzero has been great. They've been here working for the town for the last 10 years. As a best practice, periodically you should be changing audit firms. Obviously, they recommend probably 6 to 9 years, but there's a lot of heavy lifting in the first couple of years with a new auditing firm. So 10 years is a good time frame. So I think we're ready to move on, and we're ready to have some new eyes on the work that we're hoping to continue with here.
Mr. Donegan.
So my only comment on that is that, you know, when Trish, you came in, you know, the council, what we were looking for you to do and what Andy was promoting that you would do was really take what had been run, our finances, for instance. You came in and they had left a bomb behind, but even going back, it had been run like a real small town for so long. We brought you in to do, you know, all the things you're doing. And I, for one, want you to have the team around you that helps you get it done. And so I support your request.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I just have one question. Are you expecting a more rigorous audit through Bloom Shapiro?
Absolutely.
Okay, I was just curious. I mean,
absolutely. And what we're looking also to accomplish really is in year 3 to actually achieve the certification of excellence in financial reporting. Whether or not we'll be able to do that in year 3, we'll figure that out as we go along. But that's really our goal here. I think it's important for this town. We have a great bond rating. So I think it's important to continue to, you know, keep up our good work and show the awards and the accomplishments.
Excellent. Will we see a big difference in the audit when we get it done this year, the municipal audit?
You will. You'll see a lot more detailed information, and you'll see a different type of presentation by the auditors.
Oh, excellent. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other comments? I do agree with Mr. Donegan's comments. I think Trish and the manager, Mr. Nada, are building a team and putting together really excellent teammates. We have a new fiscal advisor. We now have a new auditor. We've added some staff, support staff for Trish in the finance department, and I'm looking forward to continuing success in the finance department. So thanks again to all involved. So I would look for a motion.
Karen has.
I have a question, Trish. Is it realistic to expect an auditor to give you opinions?
Yeah, that was actually one of our concerns through this year's audit. I haven't seen any management report. I haven't seen any comments by auditors in the past. We didn't get anything this year. Not that I want them, certainly not. No finance director wants any kind of management comments from the auditors. But there's certainly a lot of things in my mind, only being here in a year, that we need to work on. And one is system of internal controls. So to not have been presented with management comments from the auditors was a little bit shocking.
Yeah. I have to say I agree with you there as a person who sat through 2 hours of the auditor report. Who am I to argue with the person that's saving us $3.7 million and who has done really, and just in the short time you've been here, just such an outstanding job. The town should be really very, very grateful to you. So I agree with you 100%.
I appreciate everybody's words, but understand I have a great support team around me, financial advisors. We work well together. We communicate well. We look at things that are happening. So it's all about communication and building your staff. So I think that's the direction I'm going in, and I'm confident that we're going to be successful.
Very good. Just bring home another 3.7 million for the next meeting.
Yeah, every week.
I don't have any more rabbits.
All right. So we have, I asked for a motion to approve the recommendation of the finance director to award the professional audit services to Blum Shapiro.
So moved.
We have Councilor Donegan makes a motion, seconded by Councilor Zarella. Is that a question, Karen, or just a second?
No question.
Okay, we'll take a roll. Councilor Corenthal?
Aye.
Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Councilor Donegan?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries 5-0. Under new business, I've had a request from Councilor Engelhardt to add an agenda item for discussion purposes only. And this is an item to add to the agenda related to enforcement of municipal zoning ordinances. So I want to ask our solicitor to make sure we phrase this correctly, how specific this motion needs to be. Maybe Councilor Engelhardt can express what her intent is, and then you can help us formulate the motion. So Councilor Engelhardt?
I just wanted to add for new business for discussion only, maybe depending on the situation, for a future item, about enforcing the local zoning codes. I actually had a couple requests about signage and also houses that had been left empty and their exterior care, and that I know comes up in zoning. So I was curious, I can add that, or do I have to wait?
I think you can add it as indicated. It would be listed as discussion of enforcement of zoning enforcement, including signage and abandoned houses.
So moved.
Okay. So I will make a motion, as worded by our solicitor, a motion for discussion purposes only related to enforcement of municipal zoning ordinances of signage and abandoned houses.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I'm sorry, who did the seconding there? Was that Council Donegan? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. We'll take a roll call. Council Engelhardt?
Aye.
Council Corinthal?
Aye.
Council Zerella?
Aye.
Council Donegan?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So the motion to add this agenda item passes 5-0. So Council Engelhardt, the floor is yours.
But before you begin, can I just caution you to please not put specific, not give us specific examples, just hypothetical examples, please.
I
Because that we would have to notify.
Yeah, like my friend is having a legal problem, right?
I did have an actual inquiry about it from somebody I know who actually did ask about if we are enforcing zoning code as far as flag. We have several areas where there are flag signs which are highly not appropriate in East Greenwich. And then also apparently there were some concerns about some houses, or a house in particular, but a couple other houses as well, that have been left empty, and whether or not I know we have a code as far as you have to keep the exteriors up to a certain standard, whether we can enforce that, or how do we go about it, and how do we address this issue? Because I think, in my own personal opinion, I do think that we have, the council needs to have more teeth maybe and able to enforce some of these rules, that we have let some of these things go on and hope for compliance by the offenders and not necessarily have they follow those rules. So, and I also recognize that during COVID, everything's been a little bit slow. So I'm, just putting it out there, not.
Okay. Well, let's take the first thing with the signs. I mean, in general, our enforcement of zoning is complaint driven.
Mm-hmm.
If if the code enforcement officer or officials drive by something, certainly if it's any kind of public health safety hazard, they don't wait for complaints to take immediate action. But in general, we don't go looking for zoning violations, but we respond to complaints. So if they're out there and complaint, people should call or mail or email the building official who's serves as a zoning enforcement officer. They can also contact the director of planning, and she can forward it. And we will investigate. And usually the first thing that's done is a letter, telling the person what the problem is and asking them to correct it. If they don't, that's followed by a notice of violation. And if the notice of violation is ignored, then we can take them to municipal court or superior court and try to fine them if it continues that way. Excuse me. So, on the signs, yeah, just let us know about where they are, and we'll send Ernie out to look at them and try to deal with it.
Yeah. Andy, let me follow up with that quick before you move on.
Sure.
So Renew, what happens is, and we can provide this to the council, but I probably get a notice of violation from Ernie at a minimum once every other week, if not every week. I think what you find is that the process that exists really is pretty ironclad, and we've got a couple of hurdles that we face. So one is that Ernie's the only building and zoning official. So he's the only one, right? So he's the enforcement official. So that one person has to take the action. So that's where we can fall behind at times in being responsive beyond reactionary, as Andy mentioned. So traditionally, almost all cases are complaint driven. I think the second piece is that most residents, when they pick up the phone and I get the call, and you get the call, right? We all get it. And they have a concern about a property, they expect that problem can be taken care of the next day. And that's really not the case. So Ernie eventually gets it on his schedule. He's very responsive. He visited the home in question that you were referring to. I visited the home in question. Yeah, very quickly. He got there. He took a look at it. And as Andy said, he communicates with the property owner. He tries to settle the issue. He tries to gain some compliance before having to cite the person. Typically, he gives them several weeks to be able to remedy the issue. If they're not compliant, there's a little bit of back and forth. Now, by this time, the resident who filed the complaint is typically not happy. Okay, so I think we need to understand that, because the weeks are going by, it's in the queue, and they're following through on it. But the resident is dealing with the issue, with the problem, with the impediment, with the nuisance, right? They're dealing with that as the weeks pass. And so I think that's part of the issue. But he is extremely responsive in my interactions with Ernie, and I have passed many of those feather flags that I see on the highway. And so if you have specific examples, I think in those cases that we've really set Ernie up and said, you know, this is a critical issue, you need to be out there, I think the matters have been dealt with fairly quickly. I think residents do need to call, and it's okay to call. I think they need to know that it's okay to make that phone call, because if they wait and think that the problem's going to resolve itself, it may take several months, or it's at least going to take long enough where the resident who filed the complaint is going to have is going to be very frustrated by the time the process is rectified. So if you have other specific examples, please feel free. I think we would just ask for some
zoning board member, actually, who I know,
Yes.
and he was, you know, like, what is going on? So yeah, I will,
Yeah.
I'll send you what he complained about. For sure.
Now realize too, we also have an open building official position. So so there's a position that I've been working with Joe on to actually get filled, and we were, before everything happened, we were on the verge of making that recommendation for inclusion in the FY21 budget to be able to fill that, just due to activity in town. And similar to what we're talking about here, this is one part of it. And we were unable to do that, to be able to recommend that. We have kept some funding, and we're looking at the possibility of an additional part-time building official who might be able to backfill and pick up some of the extra work. But I think that we can agree that if we can get our footing financially, that would be one of the positions we'd be looking to fill, which I think would provide significant relief and responsiveness to residents on some of these issues.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So I'll go to your second question, which are, you know, houses that are abandoned or look abandoned.
Yeah.
And that is a little harder, because even in the best of times, and we're actually in the worst of times now, but even in the best of times, I mean, we try not to be the police, you know, saying, oh, your grass is 1.35 inches tall, it needs to be cut. But nevertheless, when it does get to the point when the grass is 2 feet tall and everything's growing wild, that can be a problem with rodents. So the building official does have power under the state building code as a health code issue, to require cleanup and dealing with that. If the houses are open in any way, he has the immediate power to order them to be boarded up and secured. So if you see if there's any place that's, you know, open so that kids or animals can get into the house, that's something else that we can deal with right away. It's harder when the house is otherwise secured and just empty. We try, oftentimes, you know, those are issues where there's a financial hardship to begin with. So, you know, threatening them, telling them they've got to clean it up doesn't help. Sometimes it's hoarders and psychological issues. Sometimes it's bank-owned property that's foreclosure. And in that case, we try to send the notices of violation to the bank and drag them in. And we often go to court on that, not because we expect to get enforcement, but just that's sometimes the only way to get a bank's attention. If they get a summons telling them they have to show up in court, then maybe they will take care of the house that they own. So it's a variety of tactics, but it's a long, slow process. And unless it's something that's in imminent danger of collapsing and causing harm to other people or structures, it's not something we can deal with quickly. If there's a storm, if there's a fire and something's ready to fall down immediately, the building official has the power to order it demolished immediately. If it's not, then we often have to have a structural engineer in there to give us a report that says, yes, this is a danger because it might fall down. But even then, our remedy is not to fix up the house, but our remedy is to demolish it. That costs town taxpayers money. And then we have to sit on it. Eventually, we will probably get the money back because we file a lien to recover our cost. And eventually, when it changes hands, we'll recover that money, but it can be years. So that's why it is, I know it must be frustrating to people, and certainly we urge you to tell them to complain and let us know about it. But it's not something we can act on quickly.
All right, cool. I'll send.
Other questions?
Oftentimes it's more of a social services issue than a building enforcement issue.
Yes.
We have that in other towns, and we literally have the sad things of condemning property, and yes, it's sad, but it's also a burden on the taxpayers if suddenly the taxpayers are now putting up somebody in a hotel because we condemn their property. So unless it's really a safety issue, that's a last resort.
All right.
And there are times too when we reach out for those support services Andy was mentioned, to try to connect a property owner with an organization that might be able to help them, whether or not help them personally, or help them in terms of the work that needs to be done to at least meet the minimum standard. So
Other discussion on this agenda item? Okay, thank you for your comments, Andy and Andy. So this brings us to item 10. This is public comment, additional period for members of the public to give their opinions on town matters. We have 5 attendees who are hanging in there. So if any of you would like to make a comment, this is your opportunity. Please raise your hand. I do not see any hands among our attendees. So I will close public comment and move on to item 11, which is council announcements and comments. We would have to add these agenda items for informational purposes only. Are there any council announcements or comments? Seeing none, we did have on the agenda, I'm sorry, Councilor Zarella, I apologize.
Sorry. I would like to say that I think it's time in the near future that we move these meetings to back either the Swift Gym or to Town Hall, probably Swift Gym to start off with. I think it's getting more difficult to pay attention the whole time on these computers. It's not great for the eyes. I can't cut you off as much to make these meetings shorter. So I really would like to get back to the place where I could actually interrupt somebody and say, let's take a vote. So also, I think it's horrible if the kids are going back to school and we're still doing Zoom. That doesn't send a good message.
Yeah, I do want to pursue your comments, Michael, but I want to ask our solicitor, for council announcements and comments, did we decide that if we are going to enter them, that we have to vote to add them as an agenda item for discussion?
Yeah, if you're going to discuss them at all, I think you would need a motion to add that for discussion. It sounds like this is something to add for a future meeting for discussion in any case, rather than at the moment. But
I would say, Michael, that the manager has been interested in this topic, and I think it will come before us probably as an agenda item or a memo from the manager in the near future.
I don't think it's something we need to vote on. Isn't that up to the manager to determine where we're having it?
Well, I think it would be determined by consensus of the council. I mean, under the executive order, we still are able to continue in compliance with the Open Meeting Act on a virtual remote platform. I know some councils have gone back to meeting. Andy, do you have any thoughts on how you want to go forward with this?
Which Andy? Let me just mention, let me say one thing first. If you do go back, currently, if you try to go back to in person, because of the capacity limits and whatnot, you and the current executive orders, you have to provide both. So if you go back in person, you still have to provide the opportunity for people who don't want to show up in person to call in or Zoom in, which is one of the things that makes it harder as a hybrid. Some councils have been meeting outside, but that only really works if you've got a good open space that's covered. You know, you got a roof on it, but open sides, like the pavilion behind the town hall in West Greenwich. And even then they had a thunderstorm, so they moved 150 yards over to town hall and got a complaint, an open meetings complaint about that for moving the meeting. So I understand Mr. Zarella's concerns, but it's a very touchy thing to do. Just be aware.
Well, we don't have another meeting till August 24th, so we have about 4 minutes before we hit the witching hour of 10 o'clock. Before we want to minutes talk about it, I think it's worth at least a few comments.
Okay, then let's have a motion to add it to the agenda, please.
That's what I was working up the
Okay,
courage.
then let's-
I don't want to get all these dirty looks, but I'll ask for a motion to add for discussion purposes only the agenda, the item related to public versus Zoom sessions, in-person versus Zoom sessions for town council meeting.
So moved.
Councilor Donegan moves that motion. Councilor Engelhardt seconds it. We'll take a roll call. Councilor Engelhardt?
Aye.
Orenthal?
Aye.
Councilor Zarella?
Aye.
Councilor Donegan?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The agenda item is added. So I think one hurdle is that we would have to have simultaneous broadcast, live in person and also on the Zoom platform. So we'd have to talk to IT what obstacles that would provide. I think another issue is where to have the meetings. It seemed initially that Swift Gym would provide us with the maximum ability to social distance and accommodate both the counselors, the staff, and the attendees to the meeting. Councilor Cornthal, did you have a comment?
I have a comment. I know that a couple of people on the council really don't like the Zoom meeting, but I think there is a great advantage in the Zoom meeting for that we hadn't probably considered prior to COVID, and that is not us particularly, because we have very few people attending, but we can have people attending who, one, wouldn't normally attend because they can be home. People don't need a babysitter. I mean, there were 400 over 2 weeks in a row, there were over 400 people attending the school meeting. We don't have to worry about weather. The staff that are on the meeting can also be home. They don't have to hang around for the meeting. So I see great advantage, frankly, in the Zoom meeting. I understand the attention, it's not, maybe that great, but I frankly see it as a plus. And I think that even in the future, we should have at least an ability for people to Zoom in. I mean, a lot of businesses, a lot of my family who, do Zoom meeting have never had Zoom meeting, seem to think it's great. I think it's a plus, frankly.
Well, we would still have the ability, if we met at Swift Gym, for example, we would still have the ability to have people sign on remotely.
Yeah.
As far as doing it in the future, I agree with you, but as a public body, unless the Attorney General
Make
takes
the
the
decision.
Open Meeting Act, we would be in violation. Mr. Nada, I know you've considered this.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
thoughts?
If I could just make a couple comments. So one thing that I'd like to do is it may not be as difficult as we're making it out to be, because don't forget we have two different systems. And so I think IT and Wendy and Don and Matt are going to be critical in how we manage this. So Council Chamber and Swift both have Granicus, we have live streaming, right? So we can have everyone in the community listening live and watching live. The element's going to be is whether or not we can also have someone managing the technology, who can have a call-in center, and maybe that's a Zoom call, but you don't need the visual anymore because it's okay if we're hearing that person. We don't necessarily have to see them. I guess we probably could figure that out as well. But if Wendy, Mark, or whomever, myself in that role, can have a list of participants, attendees at a meeting, even though we're live streaming, and if Andy at home lives on Main Street raises my hand, I'll be able to communicate with the group that's there, even if I'm watching it on TV and it's live streaming, right? So, or on my computer. So if I can work with Wendy and Don and Matt to just troubleshoot that, it may not be that difficult to make it happen. We may just have a couple of hurdles, and I want to make sure that two systems are compatible in one setting, because I think, as we know, when you put 5 computers or 10 computers next to each other, we all can't be Zooming because of the audio and the feedback and the issues, just like that, right? So if I lean in a little too much, I'm getting feedback. So we'll need to figure out how best to handle it, but I think I can definitely come back with a full report on the 24th, so we can talk about maybe in September being able to make that transition.
I think that'd be great if you could get back to us with some recommendations and what our options are. The other option is to just put Mr. Zarella at Swift Gym, and the rest of us could stay home. So
I have to agree with Mike. I mean, it is hard to stare at the screen for hours, quite honestly. And it's no disrespect to anybody, but it's just like I get a massive headache from it. And I would like to be in person. I just feel that. And with all the
cookies, I know that's why you want to be.
And it's true.
That is a good point.
Karen's cooking, and I just really. But I agree with Mike. It's a little bit harder. I also think, to see the nuances of everybody. I mean, I enjoyed this so far, but I kind of now need better than this. So
Just realize, though, if you're in person, the nuances will be less in one way because everybody will be wearing masks.
Oh yeah, that's true.
So you won't be seeing the faces the same.
Well, I don't know. I might be speaking under my breath, so you might be able to hear that better.
if there's an open mic, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I think when I watched a little bit of the North Kingstown Town Council meeting, and not everyone was wearing masks. They were distanced 6 feet or more. Some wore them, some did not. So we'd have to check on what the recommendations are if you're able to distance appropriately. But so Andy, you'll have some information for us. And I think we're talking about probably after Labor Day. We have a meeting on the 24th. We probably won't be live in person for that one.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. If we can move forward, it's good to explore that idea.
Yeah, we should have no trouble, Mark, in having a full report for you on the 24th. Yeah.
Great.
I personally don't know if 4 hours of a mask.
Well, that's another consideration. Yeah.
Well, I'll complain about that eventually.
That's right. But it's a new headache. You trade one headache for another. So that's good. You can put up with that for a while. Other council announcements or comments? We did have posted a item for an executive session. I think our manager and clerk had passed an email around earlier today saying that is going to be postponed to a later date. So we will not take up item 12, and we'll move on to item 13, which is adjournment. So I look for a motion. Mr. Zarella is proposing it. Mr. Donegan is seconding it. And I'll just take a show of hands. All those in favor? It is unanimous. And for a light meeting, we managed to fill it up pretty well. But we got a lot done tonight. We saved some money. We passed some good resolutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin and Sharon and
bye, Trish.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.